Today, I'm going to be ranking every mission in Red Dead Redemption 2. I'm going to start from the beginning, explaining every mission's importance to the story and how much I personally liked every mission based on both story importance and how fun the gameplay is. I will then rank every mission from each chapter at the end of every chapter and rank all the missions in one big list at the end. Outlaws from the West. The gang is introduced on the escape from lawmen who are pursuing them after a failed robbery in Blackwater, forcing them to head into the snow where they can disappear for a little bit. They hole up in an abandoned town called Coulter, which Arthur Morgan, the main character, discovers. Arthur then heads out with Dutch, the leader of the gang, to find Micah and John, two members of the gang that were scouting for places to hole up in. They find Micah, who says that there's a homestead close by. They eventually get to the homestead where Dutch approaches alone before Micah discovers a body and then a gunfight erupts. After taking out the gang members, they loot the house before Arthur goes to check out the barn. In the barn, he is tackled by an O'Driscoll gang member inside and beats him up before learning the O'Driscolls, the Vanderlyn gang's rival gang, are camped out close. They head back to the house where he finds Micah fighting with a woman that he found in the cellar. During this fight, the fight tips over a lantern, setting the house on fire, so they then head back with the woman to Coulter. I really love the Arthur introduction, and the in media res approach works well, even if it does kind of overload details onto the player with Davy's death and the introduction of all these different characters. Dutch also has a great introduction as a sort of cult leader in the gang, showing his tight control over the gang. The mystery of the Blackwater Massacre is also used well, giving the player to something to look forward to and discover. Micah's introduction is also great as a setup as the antagonistic character to Arthur. I love how Rockstar keeps John out of the first mission and introduces all these other characters, including Sadie, the O'Driscolls, and just does a good job of introducing everyone to the world of Red Dead Redemption 2 and the gang that you're going to be playing with the entire game. Enter Pursued by a Memory. Arthur and Javier, another member of the gang, head into the snow to find John, who has been missing since the gang got into Coulter, with Abigail, John's wife, pleading that they find him. I love the immediate antagonism from Arthur about John, and how John is always a lucky one, and they always have to be saving him. Arthur and Javier head up into the snow to find John, with Arthur asking Javier about the Blackwater Massacre and what happened. The expansion on the Blackwater information is nice, keeping the mystery of the Blackwater Massacre while still giving details about how messed up the heist actually was. They eventually find John's horse dead in the snow and dismount after hearing John's cries for help. They eventually find John trapped on a ledge on the mountain, seeing that he got attacked by wolves. They go back to their horses where wolves start to attack them, and Arthur has to fend them off. After fending off the wolves, they head back to camp where John is introduced back to his family. The atmosphere of this mission is amazing, with the snowstorm coming down around Javier and Arthur while on the side of the cliff, and it works well with Arthur's pissed off mood and the feeling that there are more important things to do rather than getting John back because they are in just a terrible situation. The mission does a great job of explaining the begrudging respect of Arthur and John for each other and sets the precedent that Red Dead Redemption 2 is not about John and that Arthur is the main character. This mission does a great job of introducing you to the characters, but honestly is extremely boring and a slog to get through. Old friends. Dutch finds the O'Driscoll gang camp operating out of a old mining settlement near Coulter called Ewing Basin. Thinking that the O'Driscolls will probably attack them first, Dutch decides to launch a preemptive strike on the camp and take them out before they can get to them. Arthur, Dutch, Micah, and other gang members ride to the camp, and once they get there, they get into a gunfight, which is a pretty easy gunfight to clear out, and they realize that Colm O'Driscoll actually isn't there, and he had ridden away right as soon as they got there. They eventually clear the camp, discovering dynamite and plans for a train robbery, which they then take for themselves. They also, at the end of the mission, after riding back towards camp, capture an O'Driscoll gang member named Kieran Duffy, who they take back to the camp to interrogate and see if they can get anything from the O'Driscoll. This mission does a good job of setting up the antagonism and helplessness that the people are feeling back at the camp, with Micah doing a terrible job of making it worse for everyone. You can also see that Dutch clearly holds a grudge that doesn't make a lot of sense with Colm O'Driscoll, showing that their relationship is built on history that really doesn't matter anymore. While the gunfight is okay, it's not all all that interesting and is used more as a way to introduce you to the mechanics of Deadeye and all-out gunfights. It is a great setup mission showing Dutch's overall disdain for the O'Driscolls and their way of life, and eventually sets up the train heist that's used later in the chapter. The introduction to Kieran is great and does a good job of showing his personality and overall aversion to fighting. It also does a good job to show that Colm will literally accept anyone into his gang, doesn't really care about who actually joins his gang. Aftermath of Genesis. Pearson, the gang's cook, realizes that the food supplies are running dangerously low at camp and asks Arthur and Charles Smith to venture out into the wilderness to hunt after Lenny had already come back without anything to show for it. Charles teaches Arthur how to hunt with a bow to remain stealthy. After successfully hunting a pair of deer, they carry the carcasses back to the camp, and along the way, they kind of reflect on the gang's desperation now that they're in Coulter, and they also encounter a bear that they have to go back from, and also briefly discuss the disastrous ferry job in Blackwater, with Charles not really understanding what happened because it was all kind of a blur in his head. This mission does a good job of showing the desperation that the gang is stuck in being in the Coulter area. They also have no food to feed all the extra people that they have in their gang as a result of allowing both women and children in the gang. This mission does a good job of continuing the mystery of Blackwater and showed that it all kind of happened in this flash for gang members and that they don't really want to remember what actually did happen that time. It does give a good introduction to the hunting feature, but it still feels a little bit boring. I do love the characterization of Charles as it gives us a good introduction to both his selfless and empathetic nature towards the other gang members, and honestly shows his smarts in not just blindly following what Dutch says. It also does an amazing job of setting up Arthur and Charles' relationship, showing the similarities between them having no family and falling in with the Vanderlyn gang. It's a fine mission, mostly focused on characterization, but it honestly is just kind of boring to play because you're honestly just riding around on a horse for the majority of the mission. Who the hell is Leviticus Cornwall? Acting on the plans that they stole from the O'Driscolls and the dynamite they also stole from the O'Driscolls, the gang decides to rob a private train belonging to the wealthy tycoon Leviticus Cornwall, who Hosea says that they shouldn't mess with because he has so many different areas in business and he is so rich. Arthur and Bill try to blow up the tracks with the dynamite they got, and while it doesn't work because Bill somehow messed it up, the rest of the gang, including Arthur, Lenny, and Javier, have to jump on the train while it's moving, going by, getting on the train, and eliminating the guards. After eventually stopping the train, after Arthur goes all the way to the front of the train and stops it himself, Arthur uses dynamite to blow up the door to a heavily fortified private car where they discover a stash of bonds that they can use and sell off. After securing the bonds, Arthur then can either go back onto the train and let all these people and all the guards on the train survive, or he can actually shoot them and end their life right there. This mission does a great job of setting up the tension between Hosea and Dutch and how Dutch is becoming more erratic while Hosea kind of wants to keep everyone safe as he's on the last legs of his life. This is the first time you get out of the snow, so it's a nice change of pace and you can finally see how beautiful Red Dead Redemption 2 is as a game. The set piece of slowing down the train and taking out the guards works amazingly and sets the pace for what the rest of the game can provide. The gunfight after the train stops is okay, but it feels like a bit of mindless shooting. The dynamite sequence is also great and shows that Rockstar is unparalleled when it comes to merging gameplays and cutscenes. It also foreshadows the other businesses that Cornwall is involved in that the gang will eventually end up disrupting in their own time. This is an amazing mission that preempts what happens in the rest of the game and sets the pace that Red Dead Redemption will continue at. Eastward Bound. After the blizzard that kept them in Coulter stops up, the gang decides to move east to Horseshoe Overlook, where Arthur gets on a wagon with Hosea on the way to Horseshoe Overlook, and the rest of the gang also gets on wagons and horses for the ride over to Horseshoe Overlook. While they cross a stream, one of the wheels on Arthur and Hosea's wagon falls off, and Charles, who is riding ahead, stays back with them to help. They eventually put the wheel back on, and Hosea points out that some Native Americans, which are actually the Wapiti, which are very important characters in the game, are watching them from a nearby cliff. They fix the wagon and they continue on the path to Horseshoe Overlook, talking about their lives and learning a little bit more about Charles and his life before the gang. This mission is a good start to the next chapter of the game, setting up Micah and Lenny going to Strawberry together and foreshadowing what happens in Chapter 2. It also introduces the gang to the Wapitis and their eventual plight that will get wrapped in with the gang story. It also gives you a lot of good backstory on Charles and his life before the gang. It also shows more disagreements between Hosea and Dutch, and how Hosea wants to move west while Dutch is still in pursuit of more glory and money. It also does a good job of introducing Hosea and Arthur's dynamic of older teacher and younger son/learner, and how they often get caught up in the old times. It also sets up Hosea's illness and weakness. This mission also introduces Strauss's money lending missions and how they will eventually affect the gang. Overall, this is a great introduction to the next chapter, but is a pretty boring mission in terms of gameplay, as basically nothing happens. And here are my rankings for each of the Chapter 1 missions. Polite Society, Valentine style. Arthur agrees to take Uncle, Karen, Mary Beth, and Tilly into the nearby town of Valentine. While the women scout for leads, Arthur and Uncle go into the general store and then eventually start sleeping after they're done in the general store. Mary Beth wakes them up and tells Arthur about a lead she heard in town about a train that is virtually unguarded and something that would be extremely easy to rob. Arthur then sees Tilly getting harassed by a man and stops him before heading into the hotel to find Karen. He finds Karen in a hotel room where she's getting beaten by a man. Arthur then beats him up and regroups with the gang outside, where they're recognized by a man from Blackwater named Jimmy Brooks, who Arthur chases down to a cliff, and Jimmy Brooks is hanging off the edge of the cliff, telling Jimmy Brooks that he has to forget about Arthur or he'll let him fall off the cliff. This is the first introduction to the honor system, and I really like the way that Rockstar did it with this, because there's also a part earlier in the mission where you can bring a guy's horse back to him after it goes off his wagon, and that's also part of the honor system. So these two little events in the mission that kind of introduce you to the honor system without making it something that you have to do. You can either let Jimmy Brooks fall or help him up, and it'll be a part of your honor, or you can bring the guy's horse back or not, and it's all part of the honor system. So I think it does a really good job of introducing the honor system. It also does a good job of introducing Mary Beth, Tilly, Karen, and showing their disagreements with Molly and Miss Grimshaw. Uncle also is extremely funny in this mission, and this mission serves as a great introduction to his hijinks throughout the game. The mission also sets up Tilly's eventual run-in with the Foreman brothers, foreshadows both the robbery of the Valentine Bank and the robbing of the train in Lemoyne. Jimmy Brooks is also a cool character for the short time he's in the game, and the pursuit of him is fun for a very small amount of time. It's just an overall fun mission, getting introduced to Uncle, Karen, Tilly, Mary Beth, and subtly introduces a lot of mission threads used later in the game. Exit pursued by a bruised ego. Hosea Matthews asks Arthur to join him on a hunting trip in the Grizzlies to chase after and hunt a huge bear. After selling a Shire horse to the stables in Valentine, they ride out and set up camp in Amberino. Hosea plans to hunt a legendary grizzly bear, and it's one of the legendary animals that you can use in the entire game. They use bait to lure the bear, but then it gets a jump on them and attacks Hosea. After a tense confrontation, they manage to drive the bear off. In this mission, we finally learn about the reason why Arthur has so much animosity towards John, who left Abigail and Jack, his wife and his son, for a year with the gang. While hanging out with Hosea during this mission is pretty fun, and talking with him about his experiences and heading into Amberino is pretty cool. This mission is extremely choppy, and it just feels like Rockstar needed a mission to give a tutorial to each of these different mechanics. It introduces, like I said before, stables, calming your horses, setting up a camp, crafting and cooking, hunting legendary animals, all in one mission. You also get to learn a lot about Hosea and his backstory with his wife Bessie, and how it kind of reflects Arthur's own story of trying to find a way out but not being able to. While the jump scare of the bear is kind of fun when it does come to attack you, this mission just really grinds my gears because it's so many different mechanics that are just thrown into this mission that could have been okay if they didn't just have all these different mechanics in this one mission. Paying a social call. They meet up with Kieran at camp and ask him to take Arthur, John, and Bill to the O'Driscoll hideout at 6 Point Cabin. The group then rides out and either has the option to approach the cabin stealthily or attack head-on. They eventually attack head-on, and after a shootout, Arthur then tries to search the cabin for Colm O'Driscoll, but finds he isn't there. Before that happens though, Kieran does save Arthur from an O'Driscoll who is in the cabin and shoots him, and Kieran eventually does get recruited to the gang because he did save Arthur here, and because they attack attack the O'Driscoll camp, he can't really go back to the O'Driscolls either, or just live his life out normally. So he really either has to join the gang or die. So joining the gang kind of makes the most sense for him. We finally get a mission with Kieran, and it does a good job of continuing the O'Driscoll mission thread from Coulter. The banter between John and Arthur is great, and it builds the animosity between the two of them that's kind of simmering below the surface. Kieran and Bill also have some good banter about taking Kieran's balls off, and the firefight with the O'Driscolls is pretty solid, with the stealth parts being okay. Kieran saving Arthur from the O'Driscolls, solidifying him as a full-fledged member of the gang, is the best part of the mission because it does finally build some characterization for Kieran where he really never wanted to join the O'Driscolls, but it was just something that he could do. This is a pretty good mission because it does build up the O'Driscoll plotline, but it doesn't really have anything amazing that would make it a standout mission because you're kind of just shooting a bunch of nameless O'Driscolls. Americans at rest. Arthur meets Javier Escuela and Charles Smith for a drink at the saloon in Valentine, where they also meet Bill Williamson. Bill Williamson comes in and starts a bar brawl with a lot of the other people and the members at the saloon there, and then eventually the bar brawl kind of gets out of control, starting a local named Tommy who comes from upstairs and gets into the bar brawl himself. This bar brawl then eventually develops and goes outside when Tommy throws Arthur out the window of the saloon, and then they get into a fight outside in the mud. After eventually knocking out Tommy, Arthur beats up Tommy more and more and more until he's eventually stopped by Thomas Downs, a sick man outside who's collecting money for charity and kind of just wants everyone to stop fighting. Arthur then meets with Dutch and Trelawney, who is a con man that's affiliated with the gang, who says he's seen Sean Maguire and wants the gang to come out and help with him in Blackwater. This is a great mission for how short it is. It does a great job of giving you a real life cowboy experience of getting into a bar fight. The fight with Tommy is also pretty fun itself, and also finally introduces you to Thomas Downs, who is an extremely important character in the story. Trelawney is also introduced in this mission, and it starts a mission thread of finding Sean and taking him back from the bounty hunters. This mission is extremely short, but for the short amount of time, it is pretty fun to play. A Quiet Time. Lenny Summers comes into camp yelling that Micah got thrown into jail in Strawberry and seeming extremely freaked out. Dutch then asks Arthur to go break Micah out of prison, but before going into town with Lenny and getting him a drink to calm him down. What starts out as just a simple drink quickly escalates into a night of just drunken debauchery in Valentine, where Arthur experiences a series of surreal and kind of hilarious scenes, including one time where there's just a bunch of Lennys and every single person in the bar is Lenny's. And if you haven't experienced this mission yourself, you need to go experience this one, because this one is probably like the hardest one to explain out of any mission in Red Dead Redemption, because there really isn't much going on besides them getting drunk and then just a bunch of crazy things happening and getting into like bar fights and whatnot. And eventually the mission ends with them running away from the law, with Lenny getting caught by the law and Arthur running away and then saying, "Morgan, you really messed up this time." I love Arthur and Lenny's friendship in this mission, and it really gets you acquainted with Lenny because there really isn't any missions with Lenny before this one. And then the part where, of course, Lenny's face gets put onto every other person's face is just this amazing, great fever dream of a mission. And overall, it's one of the most iconic missions in Red Dead Redemption 2, and just one of the best ones in Red Dead Redemption 2 as well. Blessed are the meek. Arthur learns that Micah has been arrested in the town of Strawberry and is also set to be hanged. After getting to Strawberry, Arthur finds Micah in the local jail downstairs. He then uses dynamite to blow the wall off of the jail, freeing Micah. This act triggers a massive shootout that engulfs the entire town. During the shootout, Micah eventually goes to one of his friends' houses in Strawberry during the gunfight and shoots both him and his wife inside. Arthur and Micah then fight their way out of Strawberry, leaving a trail of bodies in their wake. Afterwards, Micah then sets his own camp away from the gang because he feels like he needs to return to Dutch with a peace offering after causing so much trouble. I love the fact that Micah finally has to grovel in this mission, and that now he's begging Arthur to help him get out of jail. This is probably one of the best gunfights in the entire game, with the gunfight slowly progressing throughout the town of Strawberry and the anxiety ramping up after Micah pays a visit to his friend Skinny and his wife. The animosity between Micah and Arthur at the end of the mission is amazing, and I love the way that Arthur just continues to antagonize Micah throughout their conversation. This is just an amazing shootout, and while there's not the most plot development, this is one of the most fun missions to just replay in Chapter 2. Who is not without sin? Miss Grimshaw asks Arthur to find the disgraced Reverend Swanson, who has once again wandered off. Arthur finds him at Flatneck Station, where he is drunk and gambling at a game of poker. Arthur then has to take over playing poker for Swanson, letting Swanson cool off for a bit. Swanson then outside gets into an altercation, who Arthur then beats up, introducing the player to the wanted system. Arthur then sees Swanson wander onto a bridge where a train is going over, and then eventually has to go up there, take Swanson's foot, which is stuck in the bridge, and stop him from getting hit by the train. They then head back to camp, and Arthur dumps Swanson off at camp drunk and makes him go to sleep. I love the way that poker is introduced in this mission. It feels like it isn't just introducing a new mechanic, but is actually part of the story of the mission. The bounty system introduction is also pretty solid, and it doesn't feel like it's super forced into the mission. The mission is also a great introduction to Swanson and how his character arc evolves over the game, and him actually becoming a godly man by the end of the game. It also starts a redemption arc similar to Arthur's in scope. While this mission is mainly used as a mechanic introduction mission, it also allows us to get a good understanding of Reverend Swanson and his sins, and it isn't the most interesting mission, but it is good in terms of an introduction mission, which I just don't think Rockstar is good at doing. Money Lending and Other Sins 3. As part of Leopold Strauss's debt collection activities in Valentine, Arthur is sent to Downs Ranch to collect a debt from Thomas Downs. Arthur finds Thomas Downs tending his garden, where he is weak and coughing heavily. Because Downs is unable to pay, Arthur brutally beats him to make a point that any debtor is going to have this happen to them. During the beating, a sick Thomas Downs coughs blood directly into Arthur's face, and this encounter is the moment that Arthur Morgan eventually does contract tuberculosis, which kind of starts his redemption arc in the game. This is a great mission, besides being extremely important in the overall story because Arthur contracts tuberculosis from Thomas Downs in this mission. This mission does an amazing job of showing off Arthur's vicious side, with him beating Thomas Downs senselessly. It also does a great job of showing the death of the Wild West, since Arthur's line of business doesn't line up with what is seen as proper, and it's like this doesn't really seem like a thing that a cowboy would do. This mission also does a good job of setting up Arthur's disgust for Strauss's line of work, because he can see the actual people who are affected by Strauss's loans. All in all, this is an amazing mission that sets up the entirety of the story of the game. The first shall be the last. Arthur meets Javier and Charles near Blackwater, where they're trying to scout Blackwater to find Sean McGuire, one of their missing gang members. Trelawney then comes and informs the gang that Sean is being held by bounty hunters that are moving near the upper Montana River, which is very close to Blackwater. They then ride out to rescue him and eventually find these bounty hunters on the river and see that they're bringing Sean up a riverbank back to their camp. They then start an assault after Trelawney distracts the bounty hunters and fight their way up a canyon, eliminating the bounty hunters before finally finding their way to the bounty hunters' camp. After eventually clearing out the camp of any more bounty hunters, they finally find Sean and rescue him. This is our first and only look at Blackwater during Arthur's time in Red Dead Redemption 2, which really keeps up the mystique of the Blackwater Massacre. This mission also does a good job of setting up the role of bounty hunters in the game, foreshadowing John and Sadie's time bounty hunting later in the game. Trelawney is also great in this mission as always, giving us a good introduction to who he is and how he operates normally in the gang, tricking people and tricking them into doing things that they probably wouldn't be doing. I also love the development of the gunfight, going up the canyon while having to fight off bounty hunters on all sides. Sean's introduction is of course top notch, and I really love the banter back and forth between Sean and Arthur. It really does a great job of establishing the big brother little brother dynamic between the two of them and Sean's character. This is a great mission and it feels really fun to play and does a good job of introducing the audience to both Trelawney and Sean as characters. The Spines of America. Hosea Matthews meets with Arthur in Emerald Ranch, where he tells Arthur about a plan to steal a wagon and set up a new side business with this guy named Seamus, his contact in Emerald Ranch, who will help them fence any stolen stagecoaches. Seamus then tells Hosea and Arthur about a stagecoach that they can steal pretty easily, which is one of his cousins who he really doesn't like, and that they need to keep it quiet because the owner of Emerald Ranch is a little bit weird about these things, and because they don't really want it getting back that Seamus is the one that stole the stagecoach. They then can go over to Carmody Dell, which is the place where Seamus' cousin is at. The player is then given multiple options for how to approach the robbery. They can either steal it at night or create a distraction during the day. Then they can go in, and Arthur goes in and steals some stuff from them, having to get to a certain amount of money before he can eventually leave the place. And you can go in, and there's like a chimney in there which has a ton of money, so it makes it a lot easier. They then go in and go back to the coach and steal the coach and bring it back to Seamus, and eventually start a new business as a stagecoach fence, opening up a new way to make money. This mission does a great job of showing how good of a con man Hosea actually is, finding low-risk opportunities to make money for the gang. The mission is pretty solid with a ton of different options and outcomes based on how you approach it. This mission feels way different from other Rockstar missions. It doesn't feel like you're forced to pick a specific path. There's also some good bonding time with Hosea, and this mission overall is a pretty fun one, especially with the variety in the different endings it has. We loved Once and True 3. Arthur receives a letter from his former lover, Mary Linton, asking her for help. Her younger brother, Jamie Gillis, has joined the religious cult known as the Chelonians. Arthur then travels to their remote camp to find Jamie and talk to him. After a strange confrontation with the Chelonians' leaders, Jamie then flees on horseback, and Arthur has to pursue him after a bunch of just crazy things happen. Like there's like a stagecoach that goes in their way, a herd of sheep that get in their way, and then there's a train that gets in their way. And eventually he has to disarm Jamie, stopping him from shooting himself after Jamie feels like there's nothing to do after leaving the Chelonians because he's devoted his life to them, but Arthur eventually convinces him to leave the Chelonians and go back to join Mary. This mission does a good job of kind of like world building the Chelonians, as they really feel like a real cult with their teachings, and they seem to be pretty accepting of other people because they understand that their cult really is something that preys on the weak people that don't have any community and any people behind them. The horse chase is actually great with a ton of different diversions in the chase, making it so much harder to follow Jamie, which is actually pretty fun. You can also really see Arthur's caring side in this mission, showing that he's really down to help people if he actually does care about them. And this mission just in general does a great job of building Arthur's character and his relationship with Mary, showing that they are kind of this like right person, wrong time thing at the beginning of the game. And it does show that he still has feelings for her, even if he doesn't want to follow those feelings at all. Pouring Forth Oil 2. As a part of a larger plan to rob the train that heads through the Saint Denis area that Mary Beth told them about, John asks Arthur to steal an oil wagon from Cornwall, kerosene, and tar in the Heartlands. Arthur can then choose to approach the theft in different ways, such as like creating distraction, sneaking in, or just using force. But I went with, if you shoot, you can kind of like scare the horse and the horse will run away, and then it's super easy to get the wagon because there's no one there to guard it because the horse has already ran away super far away from Cornwall tar and kerosene. And then after successfully acquiring the wagon, Arthur drives it to a secluded spot near the area where they're trying to ambush the train. While this isn't really an interesting mission because there's not really any story beats to it, I do like the variety of different ways that this mission actually can be completed, where you can go in guns blazing to use the wagon, or use your smarts to drive the wagon off in a certain direction and then go to it there. A Fisher of Men. Abigail asks Arthur to spend some quality time with Jack because John isn't really going to spend any time with him, and because Jack actually likes Arthur. So then Arthur takes Jack down to the Dakota River for a fishing level, which serves as a tutorial for the fishing mechanic, which is kind of an okay thing. Like I feel like there at least is a little bit of plot beats. Jack then goes away to start doing something for his mom and make a necklace for her out of some flowers, and then eventually they are approached by two different Pinkerton detectives, Agent Milton and Agent Ross. Milton then tries to intimidate Arthur into giving up Dutch, telling him that one of the gang members had a really bad death because Milton did eventually shoot him after he was already shot up by the time he got to him. But Arthur does refuse confused because he is just a super loyal guy and doesn't want to give up Dutch at all. They then leave, making it clear that the law is now closing in on the gang, and Arthur goes back to camp, telling Dutch about the encounter and realizing that they need to leave the camp very soon. This mission does a great job of introducing the fishing mechanic to the player without it feeling too gimmicky. It works well because Arthur is teaching Jack how to fish at the same time, so you're teaching him how to fish while at the same time like teaching the player how to fish. Jack and Arthur together are pretty good. I really like Arthur opening up to him and trying to teach him about things without confusing him with all these big terms that like old people use. The tension between Milton Ross and Arthur is actually great, especially as Arthur has to deflect the questions because Jack is around. Milton's introduction is amazing because it shows the savagery that he is willing to use to hunt down the Van der Linde gang, and the ending of the mission is also great because it really just foreshadows all the trouble that the Van der Linde gang is going to get themselves into during the rest of the game. There's a great mission, and while the gameplay is quite boring, it is the beginning of the end of the Van der Linde gang. Pouring forth oil 4. With the oil wagon in place, Arthur, John, Charles all start proceeding with the train robbery, but also Sean, who shows up at the train robbery, says that he's going to be joining along with them, and Arthur and John are like, all right, I guess you can go with us. We always can use extra people. They then successfully stop the train by blocking the tracks with the oil wagon, and after the train stops, they move onto the train and start to rob the passengers. They eventually find guards in the luggage car and take them out before seeing that a huge group of lawmen has surrounded them. After fighting off the lawmen, the gang quickly escapes out into the countryside, securing the robbery. I love this introduction to this mission with Sean and Arthur's banter together before John and Charles show up. Honestly, this is one of the best casts for a mission, with 4 of the best characters coming together for a big set piece of a mission. The dialogue on the way to the train is great, with everyone making fun of Sean because he wasn't supposed to be in on the mission. The train with Arthur standing on the oil wagon scene is one of the best in the entire game, as it takes direct inspiration from the assassination of Jesse James movie. The aura Arthur has during that moment is absolutely unmatched, and the robbery section is also great. It does a good job of showing the juxtaposition between the gang members and the rich folk of Saint Denis riding in the train. Rockstar does a good job of expecting this train robbery to go pretty simple, showing off the 2 lawmen before going into this huge shootout with all these different lawmen here. The shootout is pretty solid while being quick. It feels interesting because the lawmen attack on both sides, and it's just funny to have the train robbers defending the train from the lawmen. The tension then ramps up extremely quickly, with the members of the gang all feeling like something is going wrong after this mission. It also does a good job of setting up the Valentine livestock auction as well, and just in general, it's an amazing mission. Besides having one of the most iconic sequences in the game, the plot progresses a lot, setting up future missions, and just being with some of the best characters all make this an amazing mission. An American pastoral scene. Micah Bell asks Arthur to help him rob a stagecoach that he claims is carrying a large sum of money from a bank. They then intercept the coach, easily taking out the guards, and start to take the stagecoach back to camp as Micah is present to Dutch. Suddenly, they're ambushed by a large group of O'Driscolls, and they then engage in a gunfight on a riverbank where the O'Driscolls ambush them, and after holding off the O'Driscolls, finally loot the strongbox of the coach. They then split the money and head their separate ways before going back to camp. I love the banter to start off the mission with both Micah and Arthur trying to rage bait each other by antagonizing the other. The geography and setting of this mission is just amazing. One of the most beautiful missions in the game by a long shot. The attack of the stagecoach is also just super fun because it seems just so adrenaline pumping coming down from the mountains to chase after the stagecoach. The set piece once the O'Driscolls try to take back the stagecoach is amazing, with the dropping of the tree in front of Arthur and Micah's path to the gunfight in the river, all just working together great. The setup being in a river just works perfectly. I love the way the O'Driscolls just trickle into the gunfight, which gives there a constant flow of enemies to fight. Overall, this is an amazing mission, and I feel like just any mission with Micah and Arthur together just makes for like a perfect pairing because they just go at each other the entire mission. The sheep and the goats. John Marston has a plan to rustle sheep from ranchers in Valentine and sell them at auction. They go into town to get a rifle to scare off the ranch hands who are taking the sheep to Valentine. After shooting at the ranch hands, they're easily scared away away, leaving Arthur and John to take the herd into town. Arthur then helps John herd the sheep into town, and they then head to one of the saloons where they meet with Dutch and Strauss. Dutch then asks Arthur to have a private conversation, having John and Strauss go to collect their money. Leviticus Cornwall then suddenly starts yelling at Dutch, saying that he's captured his men with his armed guards. After Cornwall leaves, Dutch claims that's a case of mistaken identity, allowing Arthur enough time to shoot out the guards holding John and Strauss, starting a gunfight in the town. The gang then fights their way out through the town and escapes, but then they are forced to abandon their camp at Horseshoe Overlook now that Cornwall knows their location and the Pinkertons are also closing in on their location. This is the first mission where we really get to see John's personality in Red Dead Redemption 2. As you can see that he's almost as smart as Arthur and Hosea at conning, but because he's not as good as them, he kind of gets the short end of the stick in the responsibilities and praise. I love the conversation between Arthur and John on the way up to the ridge, where Arthur has good intentions in talking to John, but is doing it in the worst way possible. You can also see the parallels between both of their lives and how well they sync up together. There are also some great parallels to John's time herding in Red Dead Redemption 1 and his epilogue story as well in this mission. While the herding mechanic is pretty lame, and going back to Valentine is kind of boring, I do love the random addition of Dutch and Strauss to the mission, and Cornwall's introduction is absolutely amazing and shows a huge amount of firepower that he can bring to the table. Dutch coming out of the saloon is one of the most iconic cutscenes in the entire game, and this mission really nails the tension in the air. The gunfight in Valentine is great, having solid progression throughout the entire town and really feeling like a Wild West gunfight. This is one of the best missions in the entire game, and almost everything in this mission is perfect. A strange kindness. With the Pinkertons in Cornwall closing in, Dutch sends Arthur and Charles to scout a new potential campsite at Dewberry Creek. At Dewberry Creek, they discover a German family whose father has been taken by hostile men. Arthur and Charles then track the captors to a nearby camp, eliminate them pretty quickly after they realize that a trap was set for anyone coming for this man, and rescue the man, finding a better spot to set up their camp at the place where the ambush was, as Dewberry Creek was too small for the gang. They then bring the man back to his family, and as a reward, the grateful family gives Arthur a gold bar because they run a gold mine in Germany. The beginning of this mission does a great job of showing the fraying of the relationship between Hosea and Dutch. You can also see tensions rising between Arthur and Dutch, and how Arthur feels like he's just being used by Dutch to further his personal goals. There's also some great bonding between Arthur and Charles on the way there. You can see that they realize that they're pretty similar minded on most things. You can also see that Arthur is clearly not at this point wanting to be a good person. He just cares about what he can get done and helping the gang further their goals along. Charles sees that Arthur wants and can be better, but is more focused on the here and now than being nice. The ambush after rescuing the German family's father is okay, but kind of boring if you know the twist already. You can see after getting the gold bar that Arthur realizes that he can be a good man and still be rewarded for it, and overall this is a solid mission and a good transition between chapter 2 and 3, but the mission is kind of boring besides seeing a hint of Arthur's turn to the good side. And now, here are my rankings for all of the missions in chapter 2, all 17 missions ranked. A New South. Arthur, Hosea, and Dutch head off into Lemoyne to find a spot to fish and catch up with each other. There's some solid foreshadowing about how Dutch is overestimating the gang's ability to con people, and that the people in Lemoyne are just a bunch of backwater people who won't understand what the gang is doing until it's too late. Eventually, they find some lawmen, and Trelawney is stuck in the back of their prison cart because he was running some scam in the local area. The criminals in the cart then break free, where they use like a little saw to get out of the cage, and they jump onto a nearby train passing by. Arthur and one of the lawmen chase after the train on a horse, with Arthur jumping on to fight and capture the criminals. Arthur then quickly beats up all of the criminals and brings them back to the lawmen. And then the lawman he was traveling with on the horse tells Arthur about the Braithwaites and Gray families, the two biggest families in Lemoyne, and their kind of blood feud against each other. After bringing back the criminals, Arthur, Dutch, and Hosea can finally go on this fishing trip that they'd always been wanting to go on before they had this side mission. I think just in general, this is a really good mission. I think it does a good job of introducing the player to the South area, and you can see how Dutch thinks it's a bunch of backwater people that are easy to con, and it really like foreshadows the rest of what happens in this chapter. And while it's not really all that interesting gameplay wise, it really does a good job of building Arthur, Hosea, and Dutch's relationship together and showing how close they are and how they're basically like a family. American Distillation. Arthur meets Dutch and Bill with Sheriff Gray, where they're deputized by Sheriff Gray after they get him extremely drunk. And it seems like Bill and Dutch kind of pressure him into doing this, saying that they'll do a lot of good work for him. And Gray then tells them to root out a distillation plant in the swamp with one of the lawmen from the last mission. And Arthur then learns that the Braithwaites are operating the distillation plant through the Lemoyne Raiders after seeing a wagon that had been raided by the gang. Bill and Arthur then sneak through the swamp, teaching the player about all these different stealth mechanics. And they go around taking out all the guards that are guarding this distillation plant, and then they start blowing it up, just like Sheriff Gray wanted them to do. And then after blowing up the distillery, Arthur and Bill fight off some Lemoyne Raiders who are coming and trying to fight back against them, and they take the rest of the alcohol before Dutch and Arthur have this kind of race back to camp where Dutch is like, "Oh, I'm such an old guy, but I can still race." I don't know, it's kind of funny, but this mission overall is pretty okay. I mean, I don't know, it's a fine mission, but it's definitely nothing special. The gunfights are definitely really boring. You're just shooting a bunch of nameless people, and the mission is just pretty long without having anything that's really interesting to the player. It's really just an introduction mission to the people in the swamp, and kind of like an introduction to the Lemoyne Raiders, an introduction to the Greys, an introduction to all these different families, but it's like not really the most fun mission. I feel like it's just a boring time in general. So I really don't like this one, and I feel like it's more just used as an exposition dump to tell the player more about the feud between these two families. Further questions of female suffrage. Arthur takes Sadie into town after she and Pearson kind of get into a little scuffle about them just being cooped up in camp together, and Sadie having to help Pearson with making the soup for the entire camp. So basically Arthur takes Sadie into Rhodes to take her away from Pearson and to get her a little bit of like fresh air away from the camp. And they go into Rhodes where they eventually split up, where Sadie goes into the general store to get some new drip for herself, while Arthur goes to the post office to send a letter that Pearson gave to them to send out to other people. And on the way back from Rhodes, the Lemoyne Raiders try to extort them to pay a fee through passing through their territory, and Sadie then shoots one of the Lemoyne Raiders, and they're forced to get into a gunfight, which this is a pretty good mission at like introducing Sadie and showing that she's kind of just off the cuff and is willing to shoot these men way more often than any other woman would. But it's not really the most interesting in terms of gunplay. I feel like you're just going against a bunch of random Lemoyne Raiders, and it isn't just all that fun of a mission. I feel like it's just a boring gunfight that you get into just for no reason, and just to show that Sadie is kind of erratic. The Course of True Love 2. Arthur meets Beau Gray at Tavish Hall, where Beau Gray asks Arthur to send a letter to Penelope Braithwaite, this woman that he's in love with, who's a member of the Braithwaite family while he's a member of the Gray family. And I really love the banter between Arthur and Beau Gray, and the fact that it kind of foreshadows this clash between the Braithwaites, the gang, and the Grays, and how they're kind of playing both sides. You can also tell by this mission that the gang has done a terrible job of trying to fit in, and it's easy that they've been playing both sides. And then Arthur goes to Braithwaite Manor, where he has to sneak by a couple of the guards at Braithwaite Manor to eventually give the letter to Penelope, and then Penelope gives him a gift which is going to be used in the very next mission. But overall, this is just a pretty boring mission. I don't really like the whole love story between Penelope and Beau. I don't really think it's all that interesting, and while it does do a good job of kind of pushing the relationship between the Greys and the Braithwaites and how they hate each other, it doesn't really do much to forward Arthur's plot forward, because it's not really about him. It's about these two other people, which in my opinion just really takes away from the overall arc of the story. The Course of True Love 3. Arthur meets Beau again and gives him Penelope's gift, where he learns that she'll be at a women's suffrage rally in Rhodes in the letter. And after getting to Rhodes, Arthur is forced to be protection for the rally because they need a man to be with them because they're a women's suffrage rally. They're trying to get women the right to vote, and having a man with them just gives them a little bit more protection and also gives them a little bit more validation because a man's actually supporting the rally. And the rally goes all the way through Rhodes, and they eventually get to the bank in town where they're heckled by the Gray family, and Beau Gray starts getting attacked by his cousins. Beau and Arthur then leave the town, where Arthur suggests that Beau and Penelope need to get out of town as soon as possible and go somewhere where their relationship can be shown in public, because they're in an area where every single person knows that they have a relationship together, but they can't be shown in public because they have these two different families that are feuding against each other. So Arthur tells them to go somewhere else where they can be themselves. This mission does a great job of advancing Beau and Penelope's story, but because I've never been all that interested in their story, and I feel like their story isn't like fully developed, it kind of is just a couple of these missions, and then you have the whole Greys and Braithwaite's feud that the gang is actually involved in, and I feel like Penelope and Beau are never really involved in that, and there's like one mission at the end of the game. So I don't know, I'm not really the biggest fan of this whole arc, and I don't think it does the best job of like advancing the story. An honest mistake. Arthur talks to Molly before being interrupted by Uncle, who says that he has a lead on a robbery. After Uncle tries to weasel his way out of being involved with the robbery, he eventually gets forced to join along with Charles and Bill. They rob this stagecoach wagon before learning that they're actually robbing Leviticus Cornwall, and that he has a backup wagon to hold off any robberies with a bunch of armed guards there. And they eventually escape these pursuers that come after them and get stuck in an abandoned stable next to some random house. They lay low there until night, and their pursuers check the house before learning that there's a sound that came from the barn that they're hiding in earlier. They eventually get into a gunfight after someone shoots the guards when they come inside, with the pursuers surrounding them on all sides, which is pretty cool because I feel like the gunfights normally are just like, oh, you're in one area and you're shooting at that one area. This one is like all sides are surrounded by these pursuers, so it is like a kind of cool gunfight where you get to shoot in a couple different directions, which is pretty cool. And the barn eventually gets set on fire by someone dropping their lantern, and the gang then has to escape into the forest. They eventually fight off their attackers in the forest, and they all split up to go their own ways. And I really like this mission because there are so many different things that happen in this mission. It kind of goes one way at the very beginning where it's like, oh, it's just gonna be this boring stagecoach robbery, and then it turns into this thing where you have to lie low in the barn at night. And you also do get some good time to develop like Uncle as a character, a little bit more of Bill, and of course Charles as well. So it's like all three of these characters are pretty good, and the fact that you get to develop them a lot more in this mission, and the fact that it kind of goes really awry compared to what they expected it to be at the very beginning of this mission, makes this one of my favorite missions in this entire chapter. Advertising the new American art. Arthur meets Hosea, who proposes that they should sell the liquor they stole from the distillation plant back to the Braithwaites. They then go to Braithwaite Manor, where they meet Catherine Braithwaite, who pays them for the liquor and tells them to give it out for free at the Greys Saloon in Rhodes, because she knows they stole it on orders from the Greys. Arthur then pretends to be an idiot named Fenton, while Hosea cons the men in the saloon to give out the free liquor. After serving a ton of liquor to the local guests and getting basically everyone in Rhodes drunk, the Lemoyne Raiders crash the party looking for the liquor that they were promised. They get into a gunfight, and Arthur and Hosea have to escape by jumping off the balcony into their wagon below, starting another gunfight while riding away in their wagon. They eventually escape from the Raiders, and Hosea goes to start working with the Braithwaites on a new con, and conning them to do something to the Greys. I really like this mission. It does a good job of continuing to build Arthur and Hosea's relationship while kind of escalating the conflict between the Greys and Braithwaites, which eventually does come to a head in a couple missions later, and really just pushing the conflict with the Lemoyne Raiders even further, and it kind of gives you this satisfying ending to shooting all these Lemoyne Raiders, because I like there really isn't any like big conflict with the Lemoyne Raiders before this. I guess if you're like playing around in chapter 3, you might not like the Lemoyne Raiders, but this is the one where it like kind of pushes the Lemoyne Raiders as these bad guys that you kind of want to just shoot because they're funny, mindless grunts that you can shoot at. And this mission also sets up working with both the Greys and the Braithwaites to destroy each other and rob both of them blind, following Dutch's plan. Magicians for sport. Dutch sends Arthur to go check up on Trelawney and figure out what he knows about the bounty hunters that are supposedly chasing the gang, and goes with Charles to go check up on Trelawney. After they search for Trelawney in his caravan right outside of Rhodes, he's nowhere to be seen, and Arthur and Charles go out to find him because he's likely in danger, because they see there's like a little scuffle around his house. They eventually find some of these bounty hunters, and after shooting one, you get where Trelawney was eventually taken to, and this is down by the cornfield with other bounty hunters that you have to fight off. Arthur and Charles get to the cornfield where they quickly save Trelawney before chasing after some of the other bounty hunters. They get 2 of the bounty hunters pretty quickly in the cornfield before Arthur gets caught and captured by one of them and has to be saved by Charles. They finish off the bounty hunters in a barn in the cornfield area, and then they save Trelawney and the mission ends. I feel like this is a pretty good mission. I love getting to talk more to Charles. I feel like this is one of the ones that really develops Charles and Arthur's relationship a lot more after the one with the German settlers, which I feel like really develops Arthur and Charles' relationship. But it shows why Charles is like one of the best characters in the entire game and why he is one of the coolest characters. But I feel like the gameplay of this mission is pretty weak and doesn't really build on the story besides adding a little bit more pressure of like the Pinkertons coming in on this chapter. And I feel like the Pinkertons really aren't that big of a presence in this chapter. It mainly is the Greys and Braithwaites. And because of that, I feel like this isn't the greatest mission in terms of plot-wise, because the majority of Chapter 3 is about the feud between the Greys and Braithwaites and how the Vanderlyn gang gets in between that. And there really isn't that much Pinkerton pressure in general during this chapter. Horse flesh for dinner. Arthur meets John and Javier at the Gray's place, where he meets Tavish Gray, who asks the gang to steal some of the Braithwaites' prized racing horses. They go over to Braithwaite Manor, where they pretend to be interested in buying some of the prize horses at the stables. Then go to the stables, where Arthur takes out the stable hand, and the gang steals the horses before someone from the manor sees them, and this kind of like chase gunfight ensues. They then pretty quickly escape their pursuers, and Arthur has to like rescue one of the horses that escapes from their command, I guess. And they meet the fence that's supposed to sell their horses. They eventually get 700 for the horses after the fence haggles them down to get that from 5,000. And I feel like this mission is okay. It doesn't really do much to like advance the conflict. Like, sure, the Braithwaites do have like a vested interest in the horses, but I feel like at least when you compare it to the same mission that the Braithwaites give you to do the Greys, it's like not even close in terms of what happens in each of the missions, where the Greys is like way less impactful. It's just kind of this simple thing of like, oh, you're stealing something from the Braithwaites, versus the Braithwaites thing is like, oh, let's burn down their tobacco fields and the way they make money, and let's shoot out a bunch of people. Like, sure, you're shooting a couple people at the Braithwaites thing, but I feel like it's not really all that crazy and just doesn't carry the same impact that the attack on the Gray's mansion does. So I don't really like this mission, and I feel like it's not as impactful, and especially when you compare it to the other similar mission, it just doesn't make as big of an impact on the plot. And while it does do a little bit to like heighten the conflict, it's not really like this big spark that starts the thing that eventually happens in the town. Preaching forgiveness as he went. Lenny gets a lead that there are a bunch of weapons at this place called Shady Belle that the Lemoyne Raiders are supposedly stationed at, and Arthur joins him for the raid on Shady Belle. There's a great conversation on the ride over to Shady Belle where Lenny tells Arthur about the racism that he's experienced during his time in Lemoyne, and Arthur just doesn't really understand it, where he's like, wow, you really do have a tough time in Lemoyne because there are all these racist people around. He's like, yeah, I can only talk to the black people here because everyone in Lemoyne is extremely racist. And they eventually see a wagon filled with explosives heading towards Shady Belle, so they go follow it to this abandoned mansion. And the abandoned mansion is pretty cool, and you can see that there's a bunch of explosives around it, so you can either pick two different ways of like, either Lenny can go up and charm the people, or you can just start a gunfight immediately. I just picked the gunfight, and honestly, the gunfight is pretty solid because you can kind of just shoot at them from a distance, and it does feel like a little bit more impactful than some of these other Lemoyne Raiders ones, where you're not just like shooting a bunch of random nameless Lemoyne Raiders. Even though these are random nameless Lemoyne Raiders, it just feels like they're protecting something, versus normally it's just like, oh, they're chasing after you and you just have to clean them out like that. So I think this is a pretty solid gunfight, and Lenny and Arthur eventually do ride off with a wagon filled with new rifles after they do clean out all the Lemoyne Raiders at Shady Belle, and they eventually go back to camp where they get stopped by another group of Lemoyne Raiders who they then get into another gunfight with. And they get back, and Arthur and Lenny share a nice bonding moment on the way back to camp. And I feel like this mission is a little bit lacking in the gameplay department because it is just basically a bunch of gunfights, but the bonding between Arthur and Lenny really clicks in this mission, where you can see that Arthur really sees Lenny as this like younger brother type character, similar to how he does with Sean. I feel like it makes Lenny's character arc over the entire game so much more impactful, because when he eventually does have his arc end, it just becomes this hard-hitting moment, because you really see Lenny as this younger brother character to Arthur, and you really start to like him and understand him as a character, especially in this mission, because you can see that he just wants to provide something to the gang, and he sees all these other people providing a lot of things to the gang. He just wants to be a part of that. The fine joys of tobacco. Arthur meets with Hosea and Sean at the Braithwaite Manor, where he learns of a plan to torch the Greys' tobacco fields with the excess moonshine they have. Sean and Arthur then head to Caliga Hall, where Sean takes over guiding the wagon, while Arthur hides in the wagon because the Greys already know who he is. Arthur eventually takes out the guard that's with them and joins with them in the barn, and they hole up until dark when they start to torch the tobacco fields. You then get into a gunfight with the Greys while the tobacco fields are burning, which just creates an amazing atmosphere, especially with the score roaring in the background. I really just love this mission in the atmosphere, because you have this like burning area behind you. It's all at night, and you're just like fighting against these Grey people, which is just amazing. But I really like the gunfight as well, and the gunfight progresses through the fields, which just makes it a lot more interesting and unpredictable. And it's also in this area where you never would have expected to have a gunfight, like directly in the Greys' tobacco fields, which is pretty cool as well. Arthur and Sean eventually find their way to a payroll wagon where they steal the horses and payroll before deciding to make a run for it. And this job just does a great job of building the bond between Arthur and Sean and really getting the player acquainted and bonded to him before the walk through Rhodes. So that's really cool. It really does a good job of like making Sean this cool character that you want to survive and to continue throughout the game with. And then it makes his eventual ending of his arc in the next couple missions extremely unpredictable, and you really see what happens in the game. Also, I just think this gunfight is great, and the atmosphere of the mission is absolutely insane and one of the best in the entire game. So this is an amazing mission. Sodom back to Gomorrah. Karen, Bill, and Lenny convince Arthur to rob the Valentine bank to follow up on the lead they got at the beginning of Chapter 2. Arthur also learns that Thomas Downs is dead, and his debt now passes on to his wife, Mrs. Downs. I love Bill's role in this mission, as it shows that he really wants to be the top dog in the gang, and that he feels like he gets no praise for what he brings in. It also foreshadows his role in Red Dead Redemption 1, his eventual turn in this game, and the mess up later in Rhodes. After getting to Valentine, Karen sets up her role in the bank robbery, distracting the guards before the men can start the robbery. After robbing the bank, the lawmen then surround them outside of the bank before Karen distracts the lawmen outside, starting a gunfight. The gang then quickly run over to their horses before starting an escape outside of the city of Valentine, with the lawmen chasing them. After getting away from the law, they eventually split up the loot they got from the bank robbery, and Arthur heads over to the Downs farm to check up on the debt repayment. He gets the money back from the Downs, but learn that they're moving because Thomas Downs died, and they don't want to live in the same house that they lived in while their father died or their husband died. I really think this is a great mission. It feels like the first time that Bill really is the star of the mission. And while I think the bank robbery doesn't quite live up to all of the expectations of a bank robbery, I feel like it's kind of boring for what I would have expected out of this. But it is kind of this small town bank, and you are returning to Valentine, which I feel like are pretty cool moments. And you also get the moment at the end of the mission to kind of connect back in with the Downs family. And it really does a good job of building Arthur's redemption arc that does happen later in the game. Blessed are the peacemakers. Pearson and Micah cook up a plan to squash the beef between Dutch and Colm O'Driscoll. While they likely know that it's a trap to catch one of their members, Dutch eventually gives into the plan after Micah convinces him and says that there's basically nothing that can go wrong because Arthur's going to be covering them the whole time. Arthur is then forced to protect the two of them while they make this parlay with the O'Driscolls, and Arthur gets up on this like high vantage point where he can really see Dutch and Colm meeting together while Dutch and Micah meet Colm for the peace conference, and they have this nice talk where they're like, oh, you hurt my darling Annabelle and you hurt my brother, and then they're like, oh, we can actually make up for all that. But Arthur is eventually ambushed and taken captive by the O'Driscolls, so likely this was all just a show meeting. Arthur tries to escape once from the O'Driscolls and gets shot before being tied up by the O'Driscolls in a basement, where Colm then tries to have a conversation with Arthur saying, "You would make so much more money if you joined the O'Driscolls with us, and Dutch doesn't pay you anything. You all just like him because he spouts all these crazy plans out." And Arthur eventually escapes from being tied up in the air with a file that's left in the basement before he cauterizes his wound after heating the file up with a candle and then putting gunpowder in the wound, which he then explodes. Arthur then stealthily takes out one of the guards before fleeing the area and eventually reaching camp again after his horse finds him. And I really like this mission. It does a good job of like misdirection, because when you get into the mission, you assume it's going to end in this gunfight with the O'Driscolls, but instead Arthur is captured. And it's a weird thing of like, you expect it to take a lot longer, but they immediately capture Arthur, and the whole mission is Arthur escaping from the O'Driscolls instead of the gang getting into a fight with the O'Driscolls. While I don't think the gameplay is all that interesting, as you really don't do that much throughout the entire mission and mainly are a spectator, it does push the whole O'Driscoll feud a lot further, and I do really think this is a good job of like showing what Dutch really cares about, where he doesn't really care about the feud with the O'Driscolls. He just wants to put Colm in his place. And even though there were real tensions that started this relationship with the O'Driscolls, it really has developed into a rivalry between the two of them, where they each just want to outshine the other. Friends in very low places. Trelawney tells Arthur about a stagecoach robbing that he learned from a friend in Rhodes. Trelawney also alludes to his secret family in this mission, which is kind of funny, saying that he's in this area because he has a couple of expenses to pay down in this area, just not revealing at all that he has a family. But Trelawney then introduces Arthur to Alden, where he learns that there are a few more stagecoaches that can be robbed if he talks to Alden again. They then scout this stagecoach that they're trying to rob and have Trelawney go to the coach and distract the woman inside by pretending to be a big fan of the opera singer, who's the lady they're trying to rob, inside the coach. Arthur then loots the stagecoach while the guards are distracted, and after getting his cut from Trelawney, the mission ends. This mission is extremely underwhelming to me. While it's surrounded by all these amazing missions that have like really cool things to do, this mission has basically no stakes and just feels like this kind of boring like bounty mission that you'd be doing as a side thing. And I understand that's the whole reason this mission is in the game. It is just like a side mission that you can go on at this time, but I feel like they should have introduced this a lot earlier in the game instead of having it like late or mid of chapter 3. Like all these intro missions should have been way earlier in the game. I don't know. The gameplay is also just super uninteresting, as it's just a boring stealth section that lasts for like 30 seconds. It does do a good job of characterizing Trelawney as a character, but its placement in the story is just so weird, and it should have just happened earlier in the game, because it's just like this tutorial mission, and it's like that's what chapter 2 was for, introducing all these different things to you, and having it this late just feels like a wasted mission here. A short walk in a pretty town. Arthur meets Bill, Sean, and Micah in Rhodes to work a security job in Rhodes for the Greys. While Sean and Arthur seem a bit sketched out since they've been playing both sides, Micah and Bill try to calm them down, saying that they know the Grey boys and that this will all turn out fine. Arthur eventually says something don't feel right, and Sean immediately gets shot in the head. This is really the turning point for the entire game, showing that it's a lot more like Game of Thrones in that any character, even with a lot of screen time, could die at any moment. So I feel like that's really cool, and it really just sets the tone for the rest of the game, because a lot more of these moments are going to happen. Micah and Arthur then fight off the Greys while running throughout the town, before eventually seeing that Bill got taken hostage by the Grey sheriff. After shooting the sheriff and his buddies in a little dead-eye moment, Arthur, Bill, and Micah finally leave the town, and there's also this reflection section that Arthur has at the end of the mission with his diary, where he really just talks about Sean, and he shows the camaraderie between them and this kind of like older brother, little brother dynamic they had, where Sean would just try to piss off Arthur at every single moment he had possible, and just always like make fun of him and do a lot of things. And I really just think it does a good job of like wrapping Sean's arc up for the entire game. And this is just a great mission that does an amazing job of pushing the story forward and setting the tone for the game. And the gameplay is also pretty solid because you kind of do get to deal with the Greys. And while it's just kind of this boring shootout, you do actually get to have a fight throughout the Rhodes town. And you do get to clean up both the Grey Sheriff and some of the other lawmen that you've met throughout this chapter. So I feel like that is all pretty cool. And just in general, it's a good mission that kind of just sets the tone for the rest of the game in just this one mission. Blood feuds, ancient and modern. Jack Marston is taken from the gang, and the gang supposes that Jack was taken by the Braithwaites because they saw some people that look like Lemoyne Raiders. The gang then rides out to the Braithwaite Manor with almost everyone except for Micah and Kieran to bring Jack back. The atmosphere of this mission is great, with the score hitting and the tension just being amazing on the ride to Braithwaite Manor. The walk up to Braithwaite Manor is so iconic. I just love the music that underscores this mission. It really makes it feel like the mission is like kind of like a divine intervention, something that must happen against the Braithwaites. And then after the Braithwaites refuse to give up Jack, the gang starts firing on them and you have a little gunfight. They then clear out the Braithwaites outside pretty quickly, and they make their way into the manor to find Catherine Braithwaite. They find a locked room upstairs which they can't get into before more Braithwaites come to fight from the rest of Lemoyne. John and Arthur make their way into the locked room through a side door and dispatch the 2 Braithwaite guards after they fight off the other Braithwaites that are from outside. After finding Catherine Braithwaite in the house, they drag her outside and set the manor on fire before learning that she gave the boy to a man named Angelo Bronte in Saint Denis. In the final scene, you can also see Catherine going back into the manor where she eventually does die. And you can find her charred body later in the game. All in all, this is just one of the best missions in the entire game, and it hits for multiple different reasons. You really do want to go back and get Jack, and it also just feels like something that you actually need to attack and destroy the Braithwaite family for what they did to Jack, because you really just can't bring in young boys into this whole fight. This is something that needs to be solved through adults, and the fact that you're taking a young boy as a hostage just to show that you have the upper hand on someone else is kind of crazy in its own right, but it's just really fun to have a chance to finally exterminate the Braithwaites, and also does a good job of pushing the story into the Saint Denis chapter in a nice little transition in between the two of them. You also just have great tone and atmosphere. Just having it at nighttime just feels like it's so much of a better time to do it. And the score is just amazing during this time, and you see the manor burn down in the night sky. All in all, this is one of the best missions in the entire game. The Battle of Shady Belle. Dutch, Arthur, and Hosea try to calm John down and say that Jack is okay in Saint Denis and that he'll be safe before Agent Milton and Ross show up at their camp. After trying to give them an ultimatum for the gang to turn in Dutch, the gang then forces the Pinkertons out of their camp, and Dutch asks Arthur to find a new camp for the gang with John because they can't be at one that the Pinkertons know exactly where they're at. So they need to find a spot for at least the short term before they can go out and make a big job and get out of there. On the way to Shady Belle, where Arthur thinks it would be a good spot for the new camp, you can see John's confidence in Hosea and Dutch has clearly been shaken by the fact that Jack has been taken from him. And this really sets up his outsider path in the gang for the rest of the game, because he's the first person that really goes against Dutch and in a sense kind of Hosea as well, because he's the only one that's going against their plans and saying that their plans are kind of stupid. But they eventually get to Shady Belle and clear out all the remaining Lemoyne Raiders stragglers in the building. There's a couple in there, and there are actually some pretty interesting moments, where one guy shoots himself, which is pretty weird, and you have this weird talk with him as well. I don't know, it's a kind of interesting time, but they then clean out the house of all the remaining bodies, and the rest of the gang moves in before Dutch and Arthur head out towards Saint Denis. Molly O'Shea during this time also tries to talk with Dutch, but he blows her off to go ride with Arthur, and they eventually reach Saint Denis, and you can immediately see how different it is to the places where Dutch and Arthur normally reside and where the gang normally is, because it's just this huge hulking city, and the gang is normally in these super wide open plains, so it's just kind of crazy how different they are. This mission does a great job of setting up the Pinkerton threat breathing down their throats and making it a much bigger thing in chapter 4, and the change in the scenery from the country to the big city is just so crazy, and I really like the way it foreshadows John's movement against Dutch, But overall, all that is cool, but it doesn't really do much in terms of gameplay, and I feel like it is like a boring mission in general, because you just go and you clear out Shady Belle, and then you ride with Dutch into Saint Denis, so there's not really much that I would think is that interesting as a mission, but there are a lot of cool things that this mission does to set up Chapter 4, and to just have like as a nice transition mission in between Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. And now, here are my rankings for all 17 missions in Chapter 3. The Joys of Civilization. Arthur meets Dutch at the Bastille Saloon in Saint Denis. After getting rejected at the bar after asking about Bronte, Arthur asks like these little street kids about Bronte, and they say, "Oh, we'll take you to Mr. Bronte." He then gets swindled into paying $5 for the kids to show him where Bronte lives, which is a lot of money, and then gets shown around like the church area and the doctor area by the kids, which also does some cool foreshadowing about Arthur's later visit to the doctor, where it's like, oh, the first thing he sees in Saint Denis and is shown is the doctor's office, and then that becomes probably the most important thing in the game to Arthur in Saint Denis, so that's pretty interesting. He then gets pickpocketed by one of the street kids after they show him the church, and then he has to chase the kid around the city trying to pickpocket him back and taking the money from him. They eventually go around the town and try to chase him, but eventually it gets to another kid who seems like the leader of these street kids, who tells Arthur where Bronte lives and that he works for Bronte, and a lot of these younger kids also work for Bronte, that Bronte kind of controls everyone in the city. Eventually Arthur regroups with Dutch and they plan to meet Bronte later. I really don't like this mission, and while it does do a good job of like showing how far Arthur and Dutch are out of their depth while working in the city, I really don't like the gameplay. I feel like the running around and chasing the kid is not very fun, and they do have just some weird moments where it's like you can't catch them except in like certain areas, where I was like right next to this guy on the roof and you just couldn't catch him at all. And I feel like they could have at least introduced this city with like a character that at least is going to be used outside of this mission, instead of just having these street kids who are only in this mission and then not in any of the other ones. I don't know. It's kind of a weird one to me, and I feel like the next mission does a lot better job of like introducing the city than this one does. Angelo Bronte, a man of honor. Arthur meets with John and Dutch to go meet with Bronte at his mansion. Dutch eventually forces a conversation with Bronte by threatening his guard, and Bronte really gets mad at the Vanderlyn gang, forcing this extremely tense conversation before Bronte eventually erupts into laughter, and I feel like kind of realizes that he can manipulate the gang, so he asks John and Arthur to stop some grave robbers in the cemetery before they like have to give a cut back to the living. He's like, if any crime happens in the city, I need a cut myself. So he needs a cut from these guys, and Arthur and John have to go get it from these grave robbers. They go over to the cemetery where they eventually search it around for a little bit and find the grave robbers. And I really love the atmosphere of this mission. Being in a cemetery late at night works amazingly as a mission, and there's still a lot of tension because they don't know if Bronte will actually give Jack back, even though they are doing this mission where he says that they'll get Jack back after they do it for him. But the robbers eventually surprise them and shoot at them, and after dispatching the robbers, Arthur and John take their stash and start going back to Bronte. But because there is a shootout between Arthur and John and the grave robbers at the cemetery, the cops then come investigating the sound, and the gang either has to sneak out of the cemetery undetected or shoot their way out. After escaping the law on a chase around the city, if they do shoot their way out, they go back to Bronte's place and actually get Jack back. Jack seems to be fully unscathed after his time with Bronte, and they all head back to Shady Belle, where Jack finally reunites with the rest of the gang. I feel like this mission does a much better job of introducing Saint Denis, with Bronte and the rest of the Saint Denis people looking down on the gang for being these like cowboys who are out of touch and like they smell really bad and they don't understand culture at all. And I really love the atmosphere of this mission, especially when you're in the cemetery, because it really just feels kind of creepy in there. And it also just feels great to finally get Jack back, especially when you go and burn down the Braithwaite mansion and don't get him back at all there. So it is just a really good mission in that sense, but the gameplay is a little bit weak. I feel like the shootouts aren't really that cool, but the way this mission is used in the story makes up a ton of this mission, so I feel like in general it is a pretty great mission because of the way it's used in the story to show the differences between Saint Denis and the gang. A gilded cage. Arthur, Hosea, and Dutch all get invited to Angelo Bronte's party at the mayor's house. On the way there, Bill also joins them, and Dutch tells the men to start meeting people and making connections at the party that can help them make some more money. Arthur and Dutch then go to meet Senor Bronte, where Bronte points out a lot of Saint Denis high society, including the mayor Lemieux, Alberto Fousar, and the Wapitis, who all have a big role in the story after this mission. Bronte also tells Dutch about the trolley station, saying that it normally has a lot of money and they should go rob it if they want some more money. Arthur also meets Evelyn Miller, who is Dutch's hero, who tells the mayor about the Wapitis' plight and that they need someone that can go champion their cause in the government. After overhearing a conversation about Cornwall with the mayor, Arthur is then tasked by Dutch to find out what business Cornwall has in Saint Denis. Arthur then steals the correspondence from Cornwall to the mayor, and Hosea tells the gang about a potential bank robbery that they can do in Saint Denis. This mission also sets up the poker heist that the gang does, and is mainly used as a setup mission for every kind of like heist they have in Saint Denis. And while the gameplay of this mission, there basically is none, you're just kind of walking around and maybe sneaking around for a little bit as well. I really like this like whole spectacle setup they have that Rockstar made here, where it's like you have fireworks going off and you just have this huge party with all these different NPCs, and it really feels like a lively party that you're going to. So I think it is like a cool thing, and it really just shows the difference between Saint Denis and the stuff that the gang normally does, because maybe they're like drinking and having a party, but the party here is so much different because you're all out there to make connections. And it also just is this great juxtaposition between the countryside and the city itself. But there's not that much going on in the mission besides like setting up future missions, so I feel like it isn't the greatest mission because it kind of relies on all these other missions to be cool, to make this one cool. But it is okay in a sense, and I do like the fact that it kind of like does a good job of introducing all these other characters that are very important in the story. A fine night of debauchery. Arthur meets with Trelawney at the tailor to get a new outfit to fit in at the poker game on the boat. Arthur also gets a haircut before going there, and then goes on a coach to go to the ship where they're eventually going to rob. While this is essentially just a tutorial of like going to the tailor and going to the haircut guy, I do like the way it's like kind of thrown in the mission, because it actually feels like it isn't forced, and it's like, oh, you actually do want to go to the tailor before you're going to this thing where you're acting like Arthur's really rich, and you do want a haircut to like fit in and pretend like you're this really rich guy. So it does actually feel like it's like worthy as a tutorial in the mission itself. After meeting with Strauss and Javier before getting back to the boat, Javier becomes a guard on the boat while Arthur goes to the poker game where he has to swindle this guy out. All the rest of the people at the table bust out in their first hand while Arthur folds, and because he knows exactly what's going to happen, because Strauss is like signaling him, he does know exactly when to fold and when to go all in. Desmond Blythe, the rich guy they're trying to swindle, goes all in the next hand, and then Arthur wins that hand because he knows exactly when Strauss tells him to go in. Blythe then re-ups his money by putting down collateral of this new Reutlinger watch that he uses for his collateral before going all in again on the next hand. And while Blythe has pocket aces, which is basically the best hand you can have in poker for your own thing, Arthur wins with an ace high flush, which is going to beat that every time. Arthur then heads with Javier to go get the watch, where the guy with them, who's like the guy on the boat, just insults Javier, saying that because he's Mexican, he should not be working on the boat, which is just kind of crazy. I don't know, it's kind of funny. But Arthur then disarms the pit boss because they're trying to loot the rest of the safe, where there's a ton more money there as well. But the pit boss actually reveals that he has a whole nother gun that they didn't disarm, and then Arthur has to use Deadeye to stop him. But after looting the safe, they come down, and Desmond Blythe accuses Arthur of being a cheater, which then evolves into a gunfight in the boat because they're like, oh, someone shot at someone up there and they took out the pit boss already. So there's then this gunfight in the boat, and they eventually fight off these guards and jump into the river and escape the boat by swimming all the way to shore, which is just the craziest escape ever, because why is that the way you escape? They could have just had someone rowing on a boat and go that way, but I don't know, it's kind of funny. I really like this mission though, as it feels very unique compared to a lot of the other missions. Like nothing else has like a boat involved, and it feels like it's just a different kind of heist where it's more about the smarts. Of course you do like exactly know what to do because Strauss signals you when you should go all in or when you should fold, so like that kind of sucks. But I do think it is just a different way to do a heist, and I feel like that makes this mission extremely interesting, and I do just kind of like the atmosphere of the Riverboat. It just feels so different from the rest of the game, so I definitely really like this mission a lot. American Fathers 2. Arthur meets with Eagleflies outside of Cornwall Tar and Kerosene to help Eagleflies steal files from Cornwall that show that there's oil on the Wapiti land and that the government basically gives them something to take over the Wapiti land to drill for oil there. Arthur then climbs into the back of a wagon to sneak into the factory to then steal these files, and then he sneaks through the factory, going past all these different guards, and eventually gets into the director's office and beats him up while interrogating him, asking him for the files. He eventually gets the files from Danbury, the director, and climbs out the window before being caught by Cornwall's employees on the ground, which starts a gunfight. They then fight a little gunfight, but nothing really happens until Eaglefly sets off an explosion of one of the oil towers, distracting the guards and allowing for Arthur to kind of shoot past a couple of people and eventually meet up with Eagleflies, starting a chase as they try to get away from Cornwall Tar and Kerosene. Then a couple people come and they have to shoot them as well, which is kind of fun as well. But I really like this mission. I think it does a good job of like introducing the character to the Wapitis and just kind of starting that arc that eventually concludes in chapter 6, and just kind of getting the character used to Eagleflies and working with the Wapiti in general. And it also has like a nice reverberation when they go back to Cornwall Tar and Kerosene with Eagleflies in chapter 6 when it is like the peak of the game. And I feel like the gameplay is solid. I really like this like sneak section. I feel like it's one of the best sneak sections in the game, and that's not saying much because most of the sneak sections in the game absolutely are terrible, but this one's actually kind of okay. And there also is a pretty fun gunfight. I feel like it's just another area where there's like a kind of cool gunfight happening in Cornwall Tar and Kerosene because you'd never expect a gunfight to happen there. And like the whole oil tower getting exploded as well is just kind of crazy. So I think in general, this is just a really cool mission. And I think it honestly is one of the better ones, even if there's not really that much like plot development happening in this mission specifically. No, no, and thrice no. Arthur sits down to talk to Mary Beth and talk about their lives before the game, before Grimshaw interrupts and says that Tilly got taken by the Foreman brothers and that Arthur needs to come save her from them with her. On the way to the Foreman brothers' house, Arthur learns how Tilly joined the gang where she defended herself from a Foreman brother and accidentally killed him. Miss Grimshaw then takes care of the guard at the door when they do eventually get to the Foreman brothers' hideout before Arthur bursts inside to find Tilly. After saving Tilly from the Foreman brothers, Anthony Foreman, the leader of the Foreman brothers gang, comes back before fleeing, leading Arthur and Grimshaw to go chase them. After taking out a couple of the other Foreman brothers there, Arthur then can chase after Foreman and hog tie him and bring him back to the camp. Arthur then has the choice to either spare or kill Anthony Foreman, and after Tilly tells Foreman that he needs to stop the other Foreman brothers from ever bothering her again. And I really like this mission. I feel like it gives a good job of like showing how even though Grimshaw and the girls kind of like always are clashing at each other and always like fighting each other and they're like never on the same page, she really does have this parental feeling towards the girls and always wants to protect them in the best way possible and doesn't want anything bad to happen to them. She wants to be basically the only one to discipline them. And it also tells the player a lot more about Tilly's life and the people she used to run with. And I think just in general, the women in the gang are definitely very underdeveloped. Like, of course, you can do a lot of things at the camp with them, but besides Sadie, I feel like there isn't any woman that's like really developed in this game. And I feel like this does a good job of developing both Grimshaw and Tilly as characters when they're not really just developed in the rest of the game. Fatherhood and Other Dreams 2. Arthur meets Mary in Saint Denis after she sends a letter to him telling that she needs his help. After getting into an argument because Mary needs his help to stop her dad from his gambling, who Arthur really doesn't like, he's the one that stopped Arthur and Mary from actually getting married. They then head to the stables where Mary's father is supposed to be at, and Arthur waits outside while Mary and her father get into an argument, so they have to eventually tail him. They follow him down an alleyway until seeing that Mary's father is actually selling her mother's brooch, something that she left to Mary when she actually died. So he's just taking something from Mary to sell to fund his own gambling addiction, which is pretty sad. And then Arthur, after he sees the father selling the brooch, he follows the coach of the buyer of the brooch, promising to get it back for Mary. Arthur then hijacks the coach and finds an area where no one will see his interrogation of the buyer, and then he beats him up and gets the brooch back from him to give back to Mary. Arthur then brings the brooch back before asking Mary to go to the theater, and then both Arthur and Mary go to the theater because they just want something to happen and like pretend that they're in love again. So they go to the theater and watch the performance there, which actually is really long. Like, I played the entire mission, and the entire time it's like 10-minute performance, which is kind of crazy. And then they leave the theater, and Arthur tells Mary that he'll run away after he gets some money, but he can't leave right now, which Mary really knows that he'll never run away from the gang because he just has too much invested there. But it is just a really good mission. I do like the fact that this really builds on Arthur and Mary's relationship, and it does it in a good way where, again, you can see that Mary is somewhat using Arthur, but she just wants to rekindle this like old love that she had for Arthur and just forget about like all of what has happened in her life where her husband has died, and she just wants to rekindle this like old love that she had with Arthur and not think about all the other things that has to go on with him being involved in the gang. So I also really like this mission because it shows the fact that their relationship has always been like right person, wrong time, and that Mary kind of resents the fact that she fell in love with Arthur, this man that has all these other past things that have gone on, and like that she fell in love with this guy who's always going to have his back to the wall because he's an outlaw and a criminal. And all the gameplay, I feel like in this mission isn't all that amazing. It does a really good job of like pushing the Arthur and Mary plot forward and kind of concluding it in a good way because Mary isn't really seen in the rest of the game, and it's kind of fun to have a mission where Arthur can just be himself and have fun for once and not have to think about all these other things that are like so important to him, like saving the rest of the gang, and he can just have a time where he's just by himself and having fun. Horsemen Apocalypse. Arthur talks with Sadie and catches up with her for the first time since her turn to be an outlaw herself in Chapter 3, and Dutch then tells Arthur about his plan for robbing the trolley station in Saint Denis before they see a horse come riding in with Kieran's body on top of it with his head in his hands. After they realize that it's an O'Driscoll raid on Shady Belle, the gang then gets into a shootout with the O'Driscolls. They continue this gunfight for a while and hold the O'Driscolls outside until they can barricade the house and keep the women and children inside. Arthur then realizes that everyone except for Sadie is accounted for and inside, and sees that she's actually outside fighting the O'Driscolls off herself in a kind of crazy way. Arthur, Sadie, and Charles then drive off the rest of the O'Driscolls from outside and keep the rest of the gang safe. This is also the start of Dutch really wanting to leave the mainland to go to Tahiti, as he sees that there are really too many problems they face on the mainland and that they have to kind of get to another place to get away from all these problems. And the journal outro to this mission is also great because it shows that Arthur has a lot of compassion for Kieran since Kieran actually saved his life. And I think this is just an amazing mission, similar to A Short Walk in a Pretty Town. It really is something where you kind of realize the stakes of the game, and even though Kieran is not really an important character in the story, it's like someone that you wouldn't have really expected to get chopped up and put in like this weird thing, because he's really like a nice guy, and the fact that he's killed in the most brutal way possible is kind of insane, and it shows that the gang has a ton of different problems that they have to fix now, and all of these different things are about to come crashing down on them pretty soon. It also does a great job of developing Sadie's story, as it shows her full transition into becoming one of the boys in the gang, and that she's like an outlaw herself, and she can kind of take care of herself and the gang a lot, and she doesn't need to be treated like the other women because she can gunsling herself. The gunplay in this mission is also pretty fun, and I feel like the fact that you have a fight in the camp, which I think is the only fight in the camp really that's like a real gunfight in the camp, is just kind of great. I feel like it really like turns everything on its head because you're actually having to fight and protect everyone from all these gunslingers that are coming and trying to attack you. So in general, I just feel like this is a great gunfight. It really just turns everything on its head. Urban pleasures. Arthur meets Dutch and Lenny by the trolley station, where Dutch first lays out his plans to go to Tahiti using a ship captain in Saint Denis, which is just really funny that the Tahiti thing is a whole meme and doesn't come out until like midway through the 4th chapter, which is kind of funny. They then rob the trolley station, and they realize that there's not really that much money in the station, and that Bronte had been lying to them, setting them up to eventually catch them here and throw them in jail. And they realize that there's a bunch of policemen outside night as well. And the atmosphere of this mission is great, which I feel like the building music in the background makes it extremely tense, even when you can clearly tell that the trolley station doesn't have that much security and whatnot. So it's like inside the trolley station, it's like this super tense thing, and it's like a bank robbery when there's just no money inside of it. So I feel like that's pretty cool. And then the police, of course, show up in these huge numbers, and Dutch, Arthur, and Lenny hop on the trolley to escape. They eventually fight off some of the police in the city while they're on the trolley, and Arthur tries to slow the cable car down, resulting in it crashing and the gang members becoming disoriented from their crash. This is where Dutch hits his head, and it's the whole like, oh, Dutch had brain damage from this and he started becoming a crazy guy after this. But no, he was already kind of a crazy guy during this mission. They eventually fight off a couple of cops after their crash when they all kind of collapse on them before escaping into an alleyway. The gunfight then continues into the streets of Saint Denis, where the gang eventually finds a wagon that they can escape out of the city on. They escape out of the city as Arthur holds off the police, but eventually there's this roadblock on the bridge out of the city, which Arthur has to blow up after Lenny throws a stick of dynamite in front of them. They then split the loot that they took from the trolley, which resulted in $15 for each of them after a shootout through the entire town of Saint Denis, and eventually shooting a ton of different policemen there, turning the police on them as well. And I genuinely love this mission because it just shows that Dutch really just takes the bait from everyone, and his intuition isn't all that great, because why would a trolley station have a lot of money, especially when there's like no security there? It also sets up the raid on Bronte's mansion eventually in this chapter, and just has a great atmosphere throughout with some of the best music in the entire game. I really love this mission because you get to like go through Saint Denis as well, and the gunfight is pretty fun because you get to go through all these different areas of Saint Denis that maybe you've never explored, or you never would have thought a gunfight happens. And again, like, it's just pretty fun in that sense. And it also like highlights a lot of the things that make Saint Denis unique compared to some of the other cities, like the alleyways of Saint Denis and the trolley system, which are two things that no other city in the game has. So I feel like it does a good job of like highlighting a lot of the important things about Saint Denis while also just being a pretty fun mission to do. Country pursuits. Hosea and Dutch get into an argument over if they should take out Angelo Bronte before robbing the bank, because Hosea really doesn't want any more heat on them when they already have so many different people that are trying to get after them. But Dutch is really too stuck on the idea of going to Tahiti that he's like, oh, we have to take out Bronte because it'll make it so much easier to rob the bank and then eventually go to Tahiti after that. And I love the foreshadowing that Dutch is essentially damning everyone in the gang except himself. He's bringing on all this heat to all these people who aren't even really involved in the gang. Like, oh, Molly O'Shea and Mary Beth, like, they're not really doing anything that's getting the heat on them, but they have to take all the heat from all these different people who are trying to attack them. And Dutch really seems to be off his rocker after the trolley mission, which I think the trolley mission kind of pushed it down the line, where he already was kind of crazy, but the trolley mission really made him more crazy, setting himself up clearly for the revenge against Bronte, similarly to his feud with Colm O'Driscoll, where he'll just do anything to eventually do something bad to Colm O'Driscoll. They then go to Le Gras, where they meet Thomas, a boatman who can get the gang to Angelo Bronte by rowing across the boat to his mansion. Thomas's partner, Jules, hasn't come back from, like, I guess catching crawfish or something, so they go to check on him with Thomas. On the way there, they check Thomas's crayfish traps. I really do love the atmosphere in this mission, with it feeling extremely tense, and it really is like immersion somewhat, because it's like this boring, slow mission at the same time it really feels like you're stuck in the swamp. So I don't know, I really love the way they did it, but at the same time I don't really like the way it immersed me, because I don't like being stuck in the swamp. But Arthur eventually splits off from Thomas and Dutch to find Jules in the swamp, and he finds Jules hiding in a tree, who says that there's a huge gator in the swamp, and that's what he's hiding from. Arthur then gets the skiff, and they all hop in and head back to Le Gras. On the way back to Le Gras, they hit a tree stump, and Jules hops out to get them unstuck. They get free, but before that happens, Jules is pulled under the water by a gator, and Arthur is then forced to get out of the boat to save Jules, because Dutch is like, oh, I'm the leader of the gang, and Thomas is the one that needs to get us to Bronte's. So Arthur, you're the only one that can go in the water, which is pretty funny. And Arthur brings Jules back to the boat while being chased by the gator. They then shoot at the gator, fending him off, and get Jules back to Le Gras. I really like the immersion and the atmosphere of this mission, but I do think it is kind of boring just because it's like so swamp-like, and I really just don't like the swamp. I don't know if this is just a me thing, because I know a lot of people were hating on me for not liking this mission, but I do think it is just kind of underwhelming because, wow, it is this huge big gator, but I just don't think the gator is all that cool, except if you actually get attacked by the gator during the mission, and then it's like, oh, it's so scary, but I don't know, you're like not looking at the gator, it's not that scary to you. So I don't know, it's just kind of underwhelming to me. And I just think, wow, there's all these like amazing missions around it, like the raid on Bronte's mansion, like urban pleasures, like horseman apocalypses. It's just this kind of weird mission that I feel like isn't all that great and is used more as a setup mission. So that's why I don't really like it that much. Revenge is a dish best eaten. Arthur meets Lenny, John, Dutch, Bill, and Thomas in Le Gras to start the raid on Bronte's mansion. They eventually get to Bronte's mansion and they sneak in by jumping over his walls before starting a gunfight with his guards. They then clear out the outside, break the lock on his door, and head inside to find Bronte. Arthur then kicks in Bronte's door and finds Bronte hiding in his bathtub. John then knocks him out and Arthur picks him up and carries him out of the house. During this, the police come and start another gunfight with the Vanderlyn gang, they then find their way out of the house and get on the boat with Bronte. Bronte then starts to insult everyone on the way back to Le Gras, saying that Dutch is nothing to him since he runs this huge city and the law will eventually catch up to Dutch. Bronte then tries to bribe the gang into setting him free, saying that he'd give them $1,000 for setting him free. Dutch then attacks Bronte and starts to drown him in the swamp, taunting him, saying the Pinkertons and the police can't help him because even though he has all this money, these people are way more loyal to Dutch than anyone else. Eventually, Bronte is drowned in the swamp and Dutch then feeds him to an alligator. And then John is out there, he's like, bro, what is wrong with you, bro? Whoever said anything about feeding a guy to an alligator? I just think that like really represents this mission. This really shows where Dutch kind of goes off the rocker, and the fact that he drowns Bronte instead of like trying to ransom him out to someone or like finding some way to make some money out of Bronte and instead like drowning him just doesn't make any sense to me, because why would you do that when this could have been a little bit of a help in getting you to Tahiti and getting all these people to Tahiti, and it really just got more and more pressure on them. And it shows that Dutch doesn't care about the overall things of the gang. He just cares about his own ideas, and if he wants to get rid of Bronte, if he wants to get rid of Colm O'Driscoll, that's more important than anyone else in their own plans and what's best for the gang. I also think this is the mission where John completely turns against Dutch, as he seems to finally stand up for himself and Dutch's whole like mission and ideals after he drowns Bronte in the swamp. And the gunfight in this mission is honestly pretty boring. I feel like you're just shooting a bunch of people that don't matter in the overall story of the game, except for when you have like the shotgun in the house and you like shoot people out of the windows. I feel like that's pretty cool, but I just think the gunfight here is pretty boring for like this overall big set piece mission where you're like, oh, you're doing this raid on Bronte's house. And it's just kind of underwhelming for this thing that a lot of the chapter has kind of come out to, where Bronte's this big antagonist in Saint Denis and he just doesn't do anything. So I don't know. I just don't think this is as good of a mission as it could have been, but I still think there are a lot of good things in this mission that make it pretty fun. And it just is nice to finally go out there and put something in Bronte's head, because he kind of deserves it. Banking the old American art. Arthur meets with Hosea and Dutch at Shady Belle while they're planning for the bank robbery. Abigail and Hosea head out to set up a distraction for the robbery while the rest of the gang rides behind to actually rob the bank. John is extremely sarcastic, like always on the way over, not expecting the plan to work because it's not thought out well enough. Bill, Micah, John, Arthur, and Dutch wait outside the bank for Hosea's distraction, which is an explosion in a different part of the town. After this happens, they head into the bank and meet Lenny, Charles, and Javier outside and start the robbery. It's also pretty funny that they literally segregated themselves because they couldn't be seen together, I think. I don't really know how that works, but they segregated themselves where they had all the brown people in one side and all the white people on the other side. They then loot one safe in the vault before the law shows up outside. Agent Milton is actually the law who is outside, and he's caught both Hosea and Abigail. I'm pretty sure, because someone does say something about Abigail, but supposedly after this mission, Abigail escaped during this time, so I don't really know what happened there, but he actually holds Hosea hostage outside. He then shoots Hosea, starting a gunfight between the gang and the law. After holding off the law for a little bit, Dutch devises a plan to get out using dynamite to blow a new door in the side of the bank, because they just can't go out the front door because that's where the law is. Arthur then escapes to the roof to draw the law's fire away from the bank, facilitating some of the gang to escape from the bank. The law then continues to pile on into the bank, and John is supposedly arrested in the chaos at the bank. Arthur and Lenny then go to find a path across the rooftops because they need to find some way out of there. While making their way across the rooftops, Lenny is shot by lawmen coming up to the roofs, and it's just kind of like catching everyone by surprise, and they're like, oh, I guess we have to leave Lenny. Bill, Charles, Micah, Javier, and Dutch then make their way into an abandoned building in Saint Denis, and they have to camp out for the night until the law is a lot calmer. Dutch then suggests the gang heads out on a boat for a few weeks because there's going to be so much heat on them, at least for the time being. They robbed a bank in Saint Denis, they have the Pinkertons off them, and everyone's going to be looking around for them at least for a couple weeks until they know that they're directly not in the Saint Denis area. At nighttime, they then escape out of the building, heading down to the docks to stow away on a boat. They finally get to the boats and they see 4 armed men protecting the boats. So they realize they have to have like a distraction. So Charles decides he's going to distract the men while the rest of the gang can get away on that boat. They then sneak onto a boat named the Antenor, where they stow away before Dutch tries to bribe the captain with a bit of their gold they stole. They get their freedom on the boat after giving the captain a good amount of their gold and realize that their boat is actually heading towards Cuba. A storm then hits them at the end of the mission, which starts the beginning of chapter 5. And I really just think this is an amazing mission. It really does a good job of like capping off chapter 4 and having a lot of these like plot threads come into one, where it's like the Bronte plot thread / like Saint Denis plot thread happens, where they try to rob the boat. The Pinkerton plot thread happens, like Hosea and Lenny both somehow surprisingly die, and you lose like Charles as well somehow, John as well, and you're stuck with basically the worst characters: Javier, Bill, Micah, and Dutch. So all these like bad characters that eventually turn to be antagonists you're stuck with for chapter 5. And I just feel like this is a genuine great conclusion to one of the best chapters in the entire game. It's a super long mission that a lot of different stuff happens, and there's a bunch of different plot twists in this own mission. So I feel like it just kind of catches you off guard with all the different things that happen, and it just continues to be extremely tense and has this good atmosphere. The gunfights are also pretty solid. I mean, I think fighting and like protecting the bank while the law is on the outside, especially after Hosea dies, is just great. And also just pushes the story in a huge way forward, showing that like it's going to be Dutch is the main man at the top of the gang because Hosea is now dead, and they're in this weird area in Guarma after the fact. So it just does a lot in a lot of different ways, and I feel like is one of the best missions because it really just sets the game going forward and sets the tone for what's going to happen in the rest of the story. And now here are the rankings for all of the missions in chapter 4. Lost and Not Quite Found. This is really just an interlude mission in between chapter 4 and chapter 5, but Arthur's basically asleep on this boat and they realize that a storm is happening and this ship is going to be going overboard, so they're all in danger. Arthur tries to follow the rest of the gang onto a lifeboat to escape, but he's like, oh no, I can't get to you guys go alone. And then he eventually just goes into the water himself and eventually swims his way to shore. Welcome to the New World. Arthur then wakes up on an island that he knows nothing about after they get shipwrecked. After walking for a long while, Arthur finds a campsite where Javier, Bill, Micah, and Dutch are all situated. Arthur learns that they're on the island of Guarma in the Caribbean, the next island near Cuba, which is actually a sugar plantation island. They then get captured by the local sugar plantation like guards, I guess, who say that there's a lot of trouble on the island and that there are people trying to start a revolution on the island. They then join up with some of the rebels on the island with their chain gang before other rebels try to start to free the gang by shooting at these plantation guards, whatever you want to call them. Javier gets shot and captured by the workers while the rest of the gang escapes with the rebels. They then get into this gunfight with the workers as well, facilitating their escape and freedom on Guarma, and meet Hector Fontaine, the leader of the rebels on the island. They make a deal with Hector to get off the island with Javier in exchange for giving their help to continue the revolution on the island. I don't really like this mission. While it does a good job of introducing Guarma, the island, to the player, it doesn't really give a good reason to like the rebels or want to fight for or with them. Like, you do get this reason to do it because it's going to help you get off the island, But I just think Guarma is overall undercooked as a thing to do in the game, because there's only like 5 missions here, while there's a whole new island and setting that you have to explore, and you just never really get used to it. And just the gunfights don't really do much to help the mission at all. And I think the walking around the island and the chain gang is just one of the most boring parts. You just have to walk for so long during this mission. So overall, I just don't think this is a good mission at all. A kind and benevolent despot. Arthur meets with Dutch to save Javier, meeting a guide who can help them reach Javier. Throughout this entire mission, Arthur's trust in Dutch seems to be waning, as Dutch has really almost fully gone off his rocker, saying that they need to go back and that Abigail and John might be the rats that keep the law on their back because somehow they escaped during this entire time. After their guide threatens them and asks for more money, Dutch then strangles her and says that she was going to betray them. I really love the tension between Arthur and Dutch in this mission, with Dutch seemingly going crazy and Arthur's trust and all of Dutch's different plans kind of going out the wayside. They then see Javier being held captive by the workers and start a plan to break him out by causing a distraction to free him. They create a diversion by blowing up the sugar factory, distracting the guards around Javier. They then escape the compound with Arthur holding off the guards while Dutch carries Javier, and make their way across a river where Arthur makes a final stand to keep them away from Javier. Dutch and Javier make an escape from it while Arthur holds off the final guards and then escapes himself. This is another mission that just doesn't really hold that much weight to me, because you just immediately rescue Javier after getting onto the island. There's not like a huge plan of doing it. You just go on the island, immediately rescue him, and it just doesn't really feel like it holds that much weight in the overall story. There's not like a whole concocted plan to do it. You're just out there, immediately have a plan, immediately rescue him, and it just doesn't even feel like Javier needed to be taken away in the first place, because you get to rescue him in the very next mission. Savagery unleashed. Arthur is captured by the guards on the island and tortured with some of the other rebels. Arthur escapes after breaking his chair and fights off the torturer. Then Arthur heads down with one of the rebels to rescue some of the workers that are being tortured. They sneak around the building before seeing 3 workers being hanged and save them from their fate. After fighting off the rest of the guards, Arthur then escapes with the workers. While this does push the whole saving the rebels part of this chapter forward, again, this mission just feels like it holds no weight in the story, and just a filler mission to show that Arthur and the gang are actually helping the rebels. It's extremely boring, just shooting nameless guards of Fousars. You don't really connect with any of the characters, so it feels meaningless. This could be a cool mission if there was more of this Guarma helping the rebels and whatnot, but there really just isn't any of that, so I feel like it really is hurt by the fact that the Guarma thing isn't built out at all. Hell hath no fury. Arthur meets with Hercule and the rest of the gang at a fort in Guarma, where Hercule says they need to silence Fousar before they can get off the island, because a navy from Cuba is going to come and blockade the island. Fousar brings in a whole warship, and the guards start attacking the fort from the beach as well. Fousar's men start charging up the fort, and Arthur, Hercule, and Dutch go to fight them. They finish the men off the beach, and Arthur and Hercule go back to use the cannon to fight off the warship. Arthur mans the cannon, shooting and eventually sinking the warship. I really love the spectacle of this mission, where it really feels like this huge mission fighting off the warship and keeping the gang safe on Guarma. It is kind of crazy, because I know this is one of the big set pieces that Rockstar must have come up with while making this game. And they're like, what if we had this huge warship? And it does go down in a bad way, because it's just part of this Guarma thing. And I feel like it is a little bit too easy to sink the warship, but still it feels like this huge mission in Guarma, which just feels like a tiny chapter in a sense, but it is just a crazy mission. I really love the atmosphere of this mission, and going down the fort and being damn, the warship is really shooting at us, and you have to hold off all these different people before going and attacking the warship itself. It is just this huge mission in a overall chapter that feels kind of tiny in comparison, and I feel like it just is a really cool set piece, and it is one of the most interesting missions in the entire game, because it's just this set piece that's used in this mission that doesn't have any impact in the rest of the game. The set piece is definitely wasted on this mission, and it's wasted on Guarma itself. It'd be really cool to do this if there was a little bit more added to Guarma, but in general, it still is a cool mission and a really fun mission because of the gunfight, the atmosphere, sinking the warship, Warship is also really cool. So it is a cool mission, but it's really held back by the fact that it's in the Guarma chapter. It doesn't do anything to push the plot forward. Paradise mercifully departed. The gang is ready to go out to sea, but Micah reveals to the gang that Fousar won't let them go out to sea because of his artillery and because he actually has the captain tied up with him. Hercule, Micah, Arthur, and Dutch head out to deal with Fousar and leave Bill and Javier behind. After taking out a cannon, they start a gunfight with the guards, which progresses throughout the compound. They make their way to the captain, where a Mexican standoff between Fousar, Levi Simon, his overseer, and Dutch happens. Arthur then kicks the rival to the boat captain, who shoots Simon, allowing Fousar to escape in the chaos. A gunfight with the guards progresses all the way back to the boat before they realize Fousar is actually turning his artillery on them and shooting at him. Arthur then snipes Fousar in the tower, and the gang can finally leave Guarma for good. Dutch tells the gang they still need one last score and they must meet up with the gang again and continue to go for the final score. This mission is pretty boring. I feel like there's not that much interesting going on in it. Wow, you do shoot out all these people in it, and like it is this cool progression, but I feel like the fact that you never get to see this area and this compound before this, and like you can't really explore it because there's a bunch of guards there, you just don't really have a lot of time on Guarma to really get accustomed to a lot of these places, makes it a lot worse of a mission when it could have been honestly a pretty cool place to go and like check out if there was like 15 missions on Guarma building up to this point. But it just is extremely underwhelming because Fousar isn't really this big bad demon, and it just isn't that interesting. Like Guarma just isn't that interesting of a place to go in the game. And I don't know, I just don't really think it does all that great of a job of like finishing out the Guarma chapter. Dear Uncle Tacitus. Arthur lands in Van Horn and heads back to Shady Belle to look for any letters. I love the use of Unshaken during this part of the game, as it's one of the best songs in the entire game, and it kind of explains that the game will be coming to a close very soon. Arthur then eventually returns to Shady Belle, where he reads a letter that says the gang is holed up in a village called Lakay. Pinkertons then come after Arthur reads the letter, and Arthur has to sneak out of the mansion undetected. Arthur eventually makes it to Lakay, and the mission then transitions into the next one, and I feel like this is a great mission for what it is. It definitely is like better than the last one, and while it's basically just like a fetch mission where you're going to one place and then going to the next place, the use of Unshaken really just takes this mission to the next level, because that is like one of the best songs in the entire game, and it kind of wraps everything back in where it's like, oh, you just got off Guarma, now you get to listen to Unshaken, and you're finally back with the rest of the gang. Fleeting joy. Arthur then gets to Lakay and finally reunites with the gang. Dutch also returns later, and everyone is basically reunited. They learn that Sadie and Charles basically saved the gang after they left, with Sadie basically rounding up everyone and getting them out of there before Charles joined up with them and kind of got everyone reunited and all ready to go in Lakay. Sadie also does the majority of the work, and this is really her transition from being a regular person in the gang to really being one of the men. Even though there were a couple of other moments where she was like the men, this is really the mission that does all that. After Bill and Micah get back, Milton also finds their camp with his whole gang of Pinkertons and a Gatling gun, and he says, you guys got to come out or we're going to start shooting on you, and they just shoot immediately at them. Arthur and Sadie then crawl their way out of the house they're in, going to another building in the complex through a trap door. Arthur then shoots the Gatling gunman after flanking him and starts a gunfight with the Pinkerton, clearing them off. A new group of Pinkertons then join the fight, making Arthur use the Gatling gun to drive them off. Abigail then asks Arthur and Sadie to help John escape prison, and I do really like the surprise of this mission, but I don't think the gunfight is all that great. I feel like it's like, oh, Milton comes with all these people in the gunfight, and it's just like you're just killing a bunch of nameless Pinkertons. And I feel like that's not all that fun. I don't know. It's just a weird thing to me where it could be this really cool mission, but it just feels like this nameless thing, and it just feels like kind of random that the Pinkertons show up and they don't come in with a bigger task force to take out the gang. I don't know, it's kind of a weird mission. That's Murphree country. Arthur talks to Dutch about their plans for the future, and you can see the difference between Arthur's mentality and Dutch's mentality, where Dutch still wants one last score to hang his legacy on, while Arthur just wants to help the gang out as best as possible and doesn't want any of the gang to die for their plans. You can also see how Dutch is starting to favor Micah over Arthur, as Micah will always just approve of Dutch's plans and won't have any pushback against it. Arthur then asks Charles to ride with him to Butcher Creek, where they're supposedly could find a new spot to camp where the law actually won't go because of the Murphrees there. Arthur and Charles then ride to Butcher Creek, catching each other up on what they've been to in the time since the bank robbery. After going past Butcher Creek, they spot a patrol and follow them to wherever they're headed. They then find the Murphree camp and see that they've done a ton of terrible things to a group of people that they've captured, and they surprise the brood by throwing dynamite at them, which starts a gunfight inside the cave, eventually resulting in them finding a girl that was taken captive by the Murphrees and tortured. They eventually free the girl, and Arthur volunteers to bring her back to Annesburg. Arthur brings her back to Annesburg, reuniting her with her family, and sees Mrs. Downs on the way out in Annesburg. Arthur then gets back to camp, where Molly shows up to camp drunk, and Molly tells the gang that she talked to Mr. Milton and Mr. Ross, rambling before Mrs. Grimshaw shoots her in front of the gang. I love this mission, and while it's really not all that interesting gameplay wise, it really shows how Arthur's path diverges from Dutch's and the gangs, and how he wants to start saving people instead of hurting them, especially when seeing Mrs. Downs and the lady that was really tortured by the Murphree gang. And just overall, it shows how Dutch is really becoming this really controlling guy. I mean, Molly O'Shea went out and ratted on him, but overall, this mission does a great job of like setting up the redemption arc and just setting up all of what's going to happen in chapter 6, where all of these plot lines converge and end. Here are my rankings for all 8 of the chapter 5 missions. A fork in the road. Arthur passes out unconscious in Saint Denis after a bout of tuberculosis. A man in Saint Denis helps Arthur to a doctor who he eventually tells his symptoms to. The doctor reveals that Arthur has tuberculosis and he's likely going to die soon if he doesn't go out west and find a place where he can just live out the rest of his life, even though that life would probably also be extremely short as well. Arthur then leaves the office, where he has this dream sequence of the people he's talked to having good honor, and he eventually gets to see his spirit animal, and then the mission ends. This is a great start to like the next chapter, and really reveals to the player that Arthur does actually have tuberculosis, and shows how bad it's gotten, where he really doesn't have much time left, and you can really feel that the tension in the game is going to turn a lot up, because Arthur is going to die soon, and all these plot lines are going to start to converge, and he's now going to have to redeem himself in the title of the game, Red Dead Redemption. Icarus and friends. Arthur meets Sadie in Saint Denis, where they catch up, and Sadie tells Arthur what they did after the gang tried to rob the bank, of like rounding up the entire gang, and just what her and Charles did. Arthur and Sadie then meet Arturo Bullard, who is a hot air balloon instructor who's going to take Arthur up in the air, where Arthur will scout John's prison from above, while Sadie will stay on the ground. Arthur takes the hot balloon in the air, eventually guiding it over Sisika Penitentiary, where John's supposed to be located. He eventually finds John before the guards start to shoot at the hot air balloon. They escape and head back to the mainland, where they spot Sadie getting chased by a gang of O'Driscolls. Arthur takes out the majority of the O'Driscolls following Sadie before Arturo is shot by the O'Driscolls, which makes him fall out of the balloon, forcing Arthur to have to take over the balloon. Arthur then throws a rope down to Sadie to get her into the air balloon before the air balloon actually crashes on the ground, because they don't really know what to do and how to control the air balloon. The O'Driscolls then find where they crash and start a gunfight with them. They eventually drive off the O'Driscolls, and Sadie tells Arthur that Colm got captured and wants to make sure that he will get hanged and die. I really like this mission in a way, because I like the tension after finding Sadie getting chased by the O'Driscolls. It's kind of like a plot twist in the middle of the mission after you expect it to turn out pretty solid. But Arturo is really wasted as a character, and it just shows the erraticness of Sadie, where she doesn't even think about things. She's just like, oh, there's O'Driscolls, I need to put a bullet in their head. I need to take them out as soon as possible. And I just feel like that kind of makes me sad, because they just don't really care about like having Sadie come up with actual plans as a mission. She can just do these erratic things and get off unscathed, which is just kind of bad writing in my opinion. But it does set up Sadie as one of the most important characters in chapter 6 and the rest of the game, showing that she's going to become as important as any of the men in the gang for the rest of the game. Visiting hours. Arthur meets Abigail and Sadie at Copperhead Landing to rescue John from Sisika Penitentiary. They then go over to Sisika Penitentiary, take out a guard in a guard tower, and think they spot John in a chain gang. After shooting the guards, they realize it wasn't John and that John is still in the penitentiary. They take a guard hostage, hoping that they can trade him for John, and after they get all the way to the penitentiary. All the other guards on the way don't even try to do anything to them. They're like, oh, you have one of our guards hostages? I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to let you guys take my guns, which to me is just super weird. But they make their way to the penitentiary and they ask to trade the guard for John, and John's brought out and a gunfight breaks out. They then hold off the guards from shooting them and take out a ton of them and escape with John back to the mainland. On the way back to Beaver Hollow, John and Arthur catch each other up on what's happened since the bank robbery. Dutch then gets mad at both Arthur and John for getting John out of jail, saying that he had a plan and it wasn't John's time to come back and Arthur shouldn't have brought him back. You can also see Dutch getting much closer to Micah in this mission, with them being together making a plan when John, Arthur, and Sadie actually do return to the camp. But this mission is just super weird to me. I feel like there's no consequences for the idiotic plan that Sadie comes up with. They're like, oh, John must be in one of the chain gangs. We'll just shoot the guards and get him out of there. That doesn't work. So then they have to like take a guard hostage, and then somehow all the other guards don't want to just shoot at them and maybe waste a guard. And instead they get into this big gunfight where they lose way more guards than they do unless they just shot that one guard and took out Arthur and Sadie. I don't know. It just doesn't really make sense at all for like all these things working. And they also don't have any bandanas, which I kind of get in a sense where it's like they're already going to be known exactly who broke John out of jail. It had to be a member of the Vanderlyn gang, but still at the same time, they could put some bandanas on to at least obscure that fact a little bit. Either way, I just feel like this mission makes zero sense and isn't really good at all. Like, it is okay to break John out of jail, and I feel like the end of the mission is cool, but the overall like breaking John out of jail has just the stupidest plan, and I feel like the writing is just terrible in this mission because it feels like breaking John out of prison has no weight to it and it's just something that happens to make the rest of the plot go forward. And I'm like, bro, this could have been a really cool breaking John out of prison moment, and it just doesn't work at all. Do not seek absolution 1. Arthur meets Mrs. Downs in Annesburg, where he sees that she has some disease from becoming a prostitute in Annesburg, and she tells him that Archie has started to work in the mines and that he'll likely die in them. Arthur then finds Archie at the mines where the foreman is bullying him and tries to get them to stop. He then has to fight against the foreman and beats him up before giving Archie some money to eventually get away from Annesburg. While this is a short mission, it does a good job of showing that Arthur has somewhat changed his ways, and that now that he's going to be dying, he wants to actually help people before that does happen and put them into a good thing and kind of get away from all this bad stuff that he's done. And I feel like the Downses are the perfect people because these are the people that he's done the most wrong. And now that he is dying, he wants to help them at least get to a better place before he dies. Arthur meets Archie in Annesburg, and Archie tells him that Mrs. Downs is still working and doesn't want Arthur's money. He also tells him that she hasn't come back, so he sends Arthur after her. After getting rid of the man who was with her, he apologizes to Edith Downs and tells her that she shouldn't try to get herself killed because of her pride. He then brings Edith back to Annesburg and tells them to leave after giving them some extra money. This is a great ending to Arthur's tuberculosis story, where he finally helps the Downs family in some way after creating this hole that's way too big to mend because, again, like, he literally killed his father. This is a great ending to Arthur's tuberculosis story, where he finally helps the Downs family in some way after creating a hole that's way too big to mend, taking out the father figure in the family. This also helps start his journey towards fully helping people, because these are the first people that he's truly helped in the game, and they're also the people he's kind of hurt the most by taking away this father figure in the family. This really isn't a fun mission to play, but it does mean a lot in Arthur's story and really starts this redemption arc in chapter 6. The Course of True Love 5. Arthur meets Penelope at Braithwaite Manor, where she tells Arthur that Miss Calhoun got offed by someone from Rhodes that actually knew Penelope. She then asks Arthur to take her to the train station where Beau is waiting for them to leave towards Boston. They meet Beau at the train station. Arthur buys tickets for them before Beau's cousins start attacking them. Arthur then beats up the two cousins in a fistfight and joins the lovers on the train until the first stop. Beau sees that Penelope's cousins are following them on the train since Penelope actually stole their family jewels on the way to Boston. After fighting off her cousins, the train conductor abandons the train and Arthur is forced to take over and conduct to the next stop. Penelope then offers Arthur some of her jewels that she stole from her family, but Arthur declines them because they need him more and makes a stagecoach driver drive them to Boston. I don't really like this mission because I was never a fan of the whole Beau and Penelope, Romeo and Juliet storyline, and I feel like these are the only people that Arthur saved that never really needed any saving by them. They're just a bunch of spoiled rich kids that were too scared to leave without his help, and the gameplay during this mission is also pretty boring. It's just a railroad shootout, and the only fun part of the mission is actually beating up Beau Gray's cousins, because I actually really don't like those guys and they kind of deserved a smacking. But just overall, I feel like the whole like Beau and Penelope storyline and arc is just undercooked in the game, and I feel like they have a couple of missions, but they're not really involved in the whole like Braithwaites versus Grays feud, and it's more like a way to show that the Grays and Braithwaites do have a big feud against each other, and it's not just a thing. It's like, oh, they have Romeo and Juliet here and they won't let them get married because they're a member of the other rival family in the area. I don't know. I just feel like the whole storyline during the Rhodes area is kind of like undercooked for Beau and Penelope. And I just don't really feel like this is like, it's such a good saving moment. Arthur has such a big heart for saving these people. Like, that isn't really what it feels like at all to me. Just a social call. Arthur meets Micah and Dutch in Ansburg, where he gets into an argument over who the rat is in the gang, with Micah being like, was you followed? Was you followed? And what their plans are for the future with all the problems following. They hide behind crates at the Ansburg dock, where Cornwall is supposed to show up soon too. Cornwall shows up and is spotted arguing with Mr. Milton and Mr. Ross, and is telling them that they need to start showing more results for the amount that Cornwall is paying them. Dutch then confronts Cornwall after the Pinkerton agents leave, saying that they're the same, and asks Cornwall for the ship and safe passage out of Ansburg. Cornwall then refuses him, and Dutch then shoots him. A gunfight erupts, and it progresses through the town and through the coal mine, which is really cool. They eventually cut free some horses from a carriage, starting to escape gunfight on horseback with the Pinkertons chasing them. After escaping, Arthur argues with Micah, and Dutch starts setting up a plan to rob Cornwall, sabotage Cornwall's operations, and get out. Dutch then leaves with Micah to come up with a plan. This is just a great mission. It shows how Dutch has become extremely erratic and doesn't really think about the consequences of his actions, and how he thinks that Micah is a better second in command than Arthur. You can also tell because both Cornwall and Angelo Bronte are both these like extremely rich people that could have helped them out in a ton of different ways, and Dutch just does it in the worst possible way by getting rid of them fully, which is like, it's going to bring more problems down on you and you're not able to make any money on them. The gunfight set through the coal mines is also super cool because it takes place in an area that would almost never have a gunfight, in being the like coal processing plant, and it turns it into a setting that a gunfight actually progresses through, which I feel like is really, really cool. While Cornwall's death is a bit anticlimactic, I feel like that works in its favor, as this big bad guy for the whole story dies in the most boring way, subverting the audience's expectations, while they have all these other super surprising deaths that happen in way more exciting ways. A Rage Unleashed. Arthur meets with Reverend Swanson, who tells Arthur that he stopped becoming an addict and has tried to reform his life and become a better person. Dutch then tells Arthur about his new plan to go to New York, then the island paradise that he wants to go to. Eagleflies and Charles then interrupt to tell Dutch and Arthur that the army has stolen the Wapiti's horses. Dutch then easily agrees to join Eagleflies to steal the horses back, and Arthur and Charles tag along to stop anything crazy from happening. After nightfall, the gang heads out to the boat with Eagleflies and his friend Peta and sneak aboard the boat. They deal with the guards on the boat pretty easily and blow up the anchor holding the boat down. Dutch then crashes the boat into rocks, capsizing the boat and forcing them to mount the horses in the water and bring them back ashore. Dutch then heads back with Eagleflies to take the horses back, trying to strike up a friendship with him. And I think this mission is okay. It's kind of solid, but it's mainly used as a setup for Dutch working with Eagleflies and to set up Arthur's relationship with Rainsfall and the Wapiti, and really just to get the Wapiti into the whole chapter here, because they haven't really been in the game since Arthur last worked with them. And the mission really isn't all that interesting, with its gameplay mainly being a sneak section and then riding the horses back to shore, but I do think it does a good job of like setting up all these different things that eventually happen in chapter 6. Archaeology for beginners. Arthur meets with Rainsfall at the Wapiti reservation, where he learns that Colonel Favors responded with violence against women for Eagleflies' raid on the boat. Arthur then heads out with Rainsfalls to go to a sacred site for the Wapiti tribe, and on the way he meets Captain Monroe, who tells Rainsfall that Cornwall's company has the government's approval to finally drill on their land. Monroe then asks Arthur for a favor to do later, which sets up the mission Honor Amongst Thieves. On their ride to the sacred site, there is some of the most beautiful views in the entire game, looking out from across the entire map from the mountains of Amberino, and there's some great conversations from each of them, with the player learning about Arthur's son and baby mama, Isaac and Eliza, and they eventually reach the sacred site and see that it's been destroyed. After looking for clues, they realize that it was actually the army who destroyed it and that there's a camp nearby. Arthur then offers to get the Chanupa, which is a sacred item for the Wapiti, back for Rains Falls, and tries not to hurt anyone at the army camp because then that would just make a lot worse things happen. Arthur then sneaks past the army guards and finds the Chanupa before returning to Rains Fall to give it to him. Arthur then has a nice journal section where he talks about his meeting with Rains Fall and how he thinks that Rains Fall is a man that he looks up to for his restraint, and that he would have thought Rains Fall is a weak man back in his younger days, but now he really sees Rains Fall for his strength. This is a great mission for something with very few gameplay components, taking place in one of the most beautiful areas in the entire game, and gain a bunch of good conversations that reveal lore about both Rains Fall and Arthur. It just makes this mission so good, and it feels like Rains Fall is a man that you can learn a great deal of wisdom from. You can also see how they instantly connect, and it makes you want to protect the Wapiti from the army as much as you can, which you try to do as much as possible later in this chapter. Goodbye, dear friend. Arthur meets Sadie and Dutch in Saint Denis, where they go to witness Colm O'Driscoll's hanging. Dutch and Arthur disguise themselves as police officers, while Sadie dresses as a member of the Saint Denis High Society. After seeing a pair of O'Driscolls at the ceremony, Arthur and Dutch follow one to a spot that they're gesturing to, which seems like they have a plan up their sleeves to save Colm. They overhear an O'Driscoll conversation where they leak that there's an O'Driscoll on the roof that's actually supposed to save Colm and shoot out all the people that are trying to hang him. Arthur then finds the shooter on the roof and quickly dispatches him. Dutch and Sadie then hold the O'Driscolls on the ground hostage and stop them from doing anything, and Colm finally realizes that he can't escape and this is actually where he's going to die. After Colm is hanged, Sadie freaks out and starts a gunfight with all the O'Driscolls at the hanging. Arthur then clears out these O'Driscoll reinforcements, covering Dutch and Sadie in the process and allowing them to leave unscathed. I love when you can finally see the fear on Colm's face as he realizes there's no one coming to save him, and this just feels like such a wave of relief as the O'Driscolls will finally stop being a problem for the gang. This is a great and super satisfying mission because Colm has been this like overarching antagonist who's been pestering the player throughout the entire game, and finally getting rid of him in a way that he thinks is going to go one way and it actually goes the exact opposite way. It's just so beautiful, and I don't know, I just really love this death, and I feel like this death is probably one of my favorites in the entire game because Colm really thinks he'll get out of it, and you see the fear on his face when he realizes that he's actually screwed. Honor Amongst Thieves. Arthur meets Captain Monroe at the Wapiti Reservation and hears that Monroe and Colonel Favors are having a feud with each other while trying to bend the laws as much as possible to hurt the other and their chances with their respective army and the Wapitis. Monroe asks Arthur to receive vaccines that were diverted away from the Wapiti reservations without the army knowing. The player then learns why Favors is so pushy against the Wapiti because he has a terrible legacy and he wants to have something positive to put onto his career, where he's this old man that has basically nothing to show for his entire career, and he just wants to do something that will actually make his career and keep a legacy for him. Arthur then steals the vaccine from the army wagon and brings it back to Monroe at the Wapiti Reservation, and it's honestly a pretty easy mission. This mission is okay, but it's mainly just a fetch mission to get you more involved in the Wapiti story, and it's kind of just like a side mission because you don't have to do it. Like, at least Archaeology for Beginners is like a side mission, but this is like a side mission off of a side mission, which is kind of funny. It doesn't really do much to further the story beyond that. Monroe is a cool character, but I feel like this doesn't really highlight his character all that well besides, oh, he's a good friend to the Wapitis. Like, it doesn't really push in that direction, and it doesn't add anything that isn't already in the main missions. So I feel like it's just something to like add to pad time during the Wapiti arc. But Overall, it is kind of cool because you do get a little bit more insight on the feud between Favors and Monroe, but there's not really any other reason for this mission besides getting a little bit more insight on that. The fine art of conversation. Arthur meets Trelawney, who says he's leaving the gang forever. Charles and Rainsfall then show up, who explain that there's going to be a meeting between them and Colonel Favors, which could mean a peace deal between Wapiti and the army. Rainsfall asks Charles and Arthur to be their protection for the meeting, since the Wapiti aren't supposed to carry any guns. They then make it over to the meeting, where Favors says that the Wapitis are criminals and are breaking all the peace treaties before Arthur starts coughing and is taken to the medical tent. Arthur then overhears a conversation between two army men who say that Favors is going to try to get Monroe court-martialed and tried for treason. After the conversation goes terribly and Rainsfall rides away, Favors tries to arrest Monroe for disobeying an order and treason, so Arthur then takes a hostage to save Monroe and to allow them to try to escape with Monroe. This starts a gunfight with the army on horseback, which then eventually moves to the ground after Monroe's horse is shot out from underneath him. Arthur and Charles hold off the army for a while, allowing Monroe to jump on Arthur's horse, and then the chase to start again. They bring Monroe to the Emerald Ranch train station, where he catches a train out of there, with Arthur giving him some money to start a new life. Arthur then starts a conversation with either Reverend Swanson or Sister Calderon, depending on if the player has done the Sister Calderon Stranger mission. While the Sister Calderon conversation is pretty iconic, I think the Reverend Swanson one makes a lot more sense in the game, as he's a character that like Arthur knows really well, versus Sister Calderon is just someone that Arthur has helped out in the game. And I feel like Reverend Swanson is the person that makes a lot more sense in this mission, but I understand it a bit to have Sister Calderon there as well. But Reverend Swanson tells Arthur to save the people that matter to him and leave the rest to rot. I really like this mission, as it turns the Wapiti army conflict up to high stakes, and this can be seen as a turning point of Arthur trying to save everyone he can while he's alive. The gunfights are also pretty good in this mission. There's some solid twists that work to make this mission pretty interesting, and it also does a great job of connecting Arthur's story with the Wapiti's plight themselves, especially at the end of the mission when you meet with either Reverend Swanson or Sister Calderon, where it's like, oh, they really want you to save everyone that matters to them. And Arthur thinks that the Wapiti really matter to him as well, because Rainsfall and Eagleflies are both his friends, so he wants to save them as well. The delights of Van Horn. Arthur meets Micah and Bill outside Van Horn, where Micah and Arthur get into an argument before Arthur starts coughing, and then Bill has to break up the argument. This mission does a great job of a role reversal, where Micah is now in charge of Arthur, and there's really nothing that Arthur can do about it. Arthur and Bill then head to Van Horn, where they set up an ambush for a dynamite cart that they're going to use to blow up a bridge. Bill then pretends to fall asleep in the road while Arthur snipes the guards of the wagon, clearing them out, allowing them to take control of the wagon. The law then chases them away from camp, where Arthur has to stop them from blowing up the dynamite in the back of the wagon, and they then head back to camp after clearing the law out, meeting up with Micah and John, where Micah tells him to go blow up the bridge with John and flaunts his new status as Dutch's second-hand man. This mission is pretty monotonous and really doesn't give any insight on anything other than like forwarding the plot to make the bridge blowing up happen in the next mission. It really just is a setup mission for the next one, and I don't know, I just don't really like it. The gunfight is pretty boring, and while having a mission with Bill is kind of nice for a change, because Bill is just kind of left out of a lot of the plot. Same thing with Javier as well, but I feel like Bill is left out a lot more, and I feel like he's a lot more of an interesting character. There's not really anything else in this mission that would make me want to replay it, especially when the missions before and after it are so much better, and it just doesn't do anything. I don't know, it's just kind of like this weird fetch quest that makes sense when it's like, oh, you have to use it in the next mission, but it's just not a good mission in general. The Bridge to Nowhere. Arthur meets John outside Bacchus Bridge, where John expresses his doubts about Dutch's new plan of getting up to New York and then going to Tahiti, and how Dutch has really changed from what he was before. They think that he might have changed, or he might have just grown into this man over time. Arthur then tells John to get lost with Abigail and Jack and start his life anew with his family, because he actually has a family to care for. Arthur doesn't have anyone that he has to care for besides the gang itself, so he just tells John to get lost because he is a person that he actually cares about. Arthur and John then set up dynamite on each of the support pillars of the bridge, getting the bridge ready to blow before a train comes, and they have to like pump their hand cart extremely quickly to get off the bridge alive. after getting off the bridge, they set up the detonator and blow the bridge up. I think this is one of the best set pieces in the entire game. I really like the fact that the bridge just blows up and it's there until like the end of Arthur's story, fully blown up. I'm just like, that's a crazy thing to have happen in the game, like something that you actually do affect the game and like, I don't know, change it in a huge way like that is just kind of crazy. Before leaving, John tells Arthur that Abigail also might know where Dutch hides the money in the camp and that they shouldn't trust Dutch and only trust each other because they really are brothers and Dutch is on his own wavelength thinking about Micah and whatnot. But this mission just does a great job of building Arthur and John's relationship before the end of the game and showing how they simply don't trust Dutch anymore and that they only really trust each other. The mission is also kind of boring besides seeing the bridge blow up, and I feel like the handcart is one of the most annoying things in the entire game. It's super weird that they use the handcart instead of just running off the bridge itself because they are really close to like running off the bridge when they do get up from the ladder area. So I don't understand why they didn't just do that. It feels like a weird thing to put into the mission just to put it into the mission. Like at least they could have put the handcart a little bit further over or designed it a little bit better to make it make sense. But whatever happens in the mission doesn't really make sense at all. I don't know. It's so funny to me, but even with a lot of complaints about this mission in terms of like the gameplay and not much actually happening in it, it does a great job of like setting up the end of the game perfectly. And it really highlights how close John and Arthur have gotten towards the end of the game and how they were like at the beginning of the game so antagonistic against each other. And now they've kind of gone back to being brothers because John realizes that he has like a family to take care of and Arthur realizes that he needs to just do the best for all these people before he actually dies. Favored sons. Arthur meets with Eagle Flies and Dutch and Amberino where they're going to ambush and embarrass the US Army when they come through this valley. Arthur and Dutch then set up dynamite on these trees in the valley to set up the trap, and Arthur detonates the dynamite after the patrol passes through, with the trees coming down trapping them in the valley. They try to then embarrass the patrol but aren't able to because there's a second patrol following behind who thinks it's actually an ambush that they're trying to murder all these people, so a gunfight breaks out. After massacring the army, they start to loot the bodies, and Arthur realizes that most of the soldiers are just kids who signed up for the army and they don't have anything against the Wapitis themselves. They're just these random kids that are forced to fight against the Wapitis. Another gunfight then breaks out with the second patrol following behind, and Eagle Flies is captured after more soldiers pour in and he tries to save Peta from getting shot and captured by the other soldiers. Arthur and Dutch then run off alone trying to save themselves, but they run into a whole nother group of soldiers and get into another gunfight. They then try to find a path to escape out of the mountains, but they realize it's a dead end and they have nowhere to go. They get surrounded by the army out here, and Dutch repeats his "I had to fight change" speech from Red Dead Redemption 1 in a pretty similar scenario where he's also like back next to the cliff and they jump off the cliff instead into the river below. They then make it to shore and survive this mission. I do like how this mission shows how Dutch doesn't care about anyone but himself and is doing all these things to further only his own goals, even if he has to sacrifice all these other people and their lives for what he needs to do, because he's just fully willing to sacrifice the Wapitis. He doesn't care if they're fully wiped off the map and never exist again as long as his goals actually do happen. And it's just so interesting that he's going to hurt both the army and the Wapiti during this mission, all for his plan of getting the gang out of the area unscathed. It's just so weird because you can clearly see how his plans and his morals have changed from the beginning of the game to the end of the game, where he's willing to sacrifice anyone and everyone as long as he gets the best out of it. I also do like how they repurposed Dutch's speech from Red Dead Redemption 1 in this scene, as it does make a lot of sense, but it does kind of weaken that moment in Red Dead Redemption 1 because that is like an actually great speech, and having it be used in Red Dead Redemption 2 as well kind of weakens the impact it has in Red Dead Redemption 1, where you see Dutch as this like really enlightened leader in a sense, and it's like, oh, he's also enlightened here, and he used this exact same speech where he's also pushed back up against the cliff. It also diminishes the iconicness of the original speech. While it's a good mission overall, I feel like it's really used more as like a setup mission to make the last 4 missions feel extremely consequential instead of having any huge impact in this mission itself. It's more used to like set up all these other ones that have a lot of impact on each other. Miss Sadie Adler, Widow 2. Arthur meets Sadie Adler outside Hanging Dog Ranch, where they're going to finish off the O'Driscolls once and for all. They clear out the O'Driscolls outside in a gunfight and split up, so Arthur goes to the barn and Sadie to the farmhouse. Arthur clears out the barn and meets Sadie in the farmhouse where she's butchering the O'Driscoll who took her husband's life. They then talk about Sadie's husband Jake for a bit and the mission ends. I feel like this mission just doesn't make much sense in the end of the game. Most of Sadie's plans don't have a lot of thought put into them, and they're mainly just shooting O'Driscolls, and this plan is no different. I feel like this just doesn't make sense for Arthur to go on this mission, so I guess in like a full honorable playthrough, you probably wouldn't go to do this mission because you're just kind of butchering these people just for the fun of it, and it's not like, oh, there's a reason to do that to these people. These people, again, they might be bad people, but maybe they can redeem themselves just like Arthur did, and butchering them will not help that happen. So I don't know. It's just like a weird thing to me. And also, like, the O'Driscolls were probably going to disband soon anyway because Colm was hanged, and simply just like a revenge mission for Sadie to hurt the O'Driscolls in the same way they hurt her husband. So I don't know. This mission just doesn't make much sense, and it's also like not that interesting because it doesn't really tie back to anything. The King's Son. Arthur meets with Rainsfall and Charles at the Wapiti Reservation and tells Rainsfall that he doesn't have much time left and he's going to be saving Eagle Flies for Rainsfall because he doesn't have much time left. Arthur and Charles then head towards the army fort where Eagle Flies is holed up, and on the way Arthur and Charles talk about if Dutch can be saved and the morality of Arthur's life, because Arthur doesn't have a lot of time left, so he can actually make amends to the people that he's hurt throughout his entire life and at least save the people that he wants to save before he does die. After making it to the fort, they wait until dark when they start their raid on the fort. They make their way into the fort after taking out a couple of guards on the outside, and they make their way around the fort. They make their way towards Eagle Flies and cause a distraction by shooting a lantern above a stack of wood, causing a fire. They then save Eagle Flies from the army, and the army realizes they're there in the fort, which causes a gunfight. They then dispatch the guards and break out of the fort by shooting a cannon at a patched up wall in the fort, which is a pretty cool set piece in general. Like, it does have this cool animation that goes on, and you can just walk right out of it, which is also just great. They also start a gunfight on horseback with the army men that are outside the fort, and they make their way down to the river where they jump in canoes, continuing the gunfight from the water. They then make their way down the river, holding off all of these army men before shooting two men and taking their horses to escape. This mission, in my opinion, has one of the best atmospheres in the entire game, with the next mission as well. I really just like the fact that it's like this rain-soaked evening that you go in and you take out all these people at the fort, and then you have the fire burning around the fort. I just really love the atmosphere of this mission. I feel like it's so cool when you actually go in and you save Eagle Flies from the army men. And it really just has a good setup for the end of the game, because this is like, with the last 3 missions past this one, it really just sets up the end of the game happening, and this is like the one that really starts it, because again, like maybe Favored Sons kind of starts that as well, but I feel like this one is the one that really starts like the end of the game happening, and it's like the 4th mission. This one goes into the next one, and then My Last Boy goes into the next 2 missions, which again transition themselves into each other as well. So I just really like this mission. I also just love the conversations about Arthur's death with Charles, where it feels like Charles is truly one of the only people to have Arthur's back in the gang, with of course John and Sadie, I feel like also in a similar way. I just think this is a great mission, and overall it does a lot of things greatly, and also is a pretty fun mission to have, and you're also with Charles, who's one of the coolest characters. My Last Boy. Arthur meets Micah at camp, where Micah reveals that he brought on 2 more members of the gang called Cleet and Joe, who are going to be joining them for the train robbery later in the game. Before Eagle Flies interrupts and says that he's riding out to Cornwall's factory to launch a raid, he's then interrupted by his father, Rainsfall, who tries to convince Eagle Flies not to die for his pride and to live on to endure the hardships of their tribe, saying that there's no reason to die for these silly reasons, and even if you are living on in a bad way, you are at least living on, because if you die, you can't live any longer. Eagle Flies then disregards his father's words, and Rainsfall asks Arthur and Charles to help his son not die. Arthur then asks the rest of the gang to ride out, getting Javier, Bill, Sadie, John, and Dutch all to join him on this mission. The gang bickers on the way to the oil field, with Javier, Bill, and Dutch being on one side, while Arthur, John, and Sadie are on the other. The atmosphere of this mission is also just great on the way to the oil fields, because you really have this tension between the entire gang, And even though they are coming together for this one mission to save Eagle Flies, they are just pushing against each other. You can really just like cut it with a knife. But they eventually meet one of the Wapiti coming back from the raid who's injured himself, who says that the Wapiti need a lot of help at the oil fields. Once they get to the oil fields, they split up, with some of them going to save Eagle Flies, while most of the gang goes with Dutch for the factory. Arthur, I believe Sadie, and Charles all go to save Eagle Flies, while the rest of them go for the factory. They make their way across the oil fields, eventually coming to meet up with Eagle Flies himself, and Arthur gets to save him from a soldier who's attacking him. They then continue the gunfight throughout the tar factory when a new army train arrives because Cornwall tar and kerosene is actually on the railroad itself, and more soldiers pour out, including one with a Gatling gun. They then meet up with the rest of the gang by the factory after taking out all these army men, where Dutch reveals what his plan was all along, using the Wapiti as a distraction to eventually rob Cornwall's factory, where they say, oh, it's the Wapiti raid on the factory, and then they just go in and steal a couple things and no one will ever think about them. They then make it to the factory office, where they go in and Dutch is like, there's so much money in here, and he pulls out this bond. He's like, there's thousands in here, and Arthur sees it and his face just drops when he sees $500 in bonds. You can really see the disgust on Arthur's face because he sacrificed all these men just for $500. On the way downstairs, the army comes in with Colonel Favors and starts a gunfight, and they then try to escape out a side door before a vent blows up in Arthur's face, knocking him to the ground, and Dutch leaves him inside to die. Eagle Flies then comes in and saves Arthur from the guards before being shot by Colonel Favors, allowing Arthur the time to then shoot Colonel Favors back. Arthur and Dutch get into a disagreement outside, with Arthur saying that Dutch left him to die inside, and then Arthur goes back with Charles and the Wapiti to their reservation, taking Eagle Flies back. They make their way back to the reservation, where Arthur reunites Eagle Flies with his father, and Eagle Flies dies in his father's arms. This is an amazing mission, with the atmosphere during the fight in the oil fields just being amazing. I love like the burning oil fields around you while you're like in this gunfight. This really just seems like another amazing mission where you're just in this weird area that you never expect a gunfight to happen, and with the burning oil fields around it, it just makes some of the greatest atmosphere in the entire game, and the progression throughout the oil fields is just great as well, because you're attacking all these different spots in the oil fields and you're having the gunfights in all these different spots, and then you're getting attacked by the army and a train comes in. It just like a lot has to be done with the setting here, and everything that happens in the setting of the oil fields is just absolutely amazing. It's a great conclusion to the arc of the Wapiti, and also does a great job of showing how far Arthur and Dutch have grown apart in recent weeks. And I just think everything in this mission is great. It also does a good job of like connecting back to the last mission. I think just this being the conclusion to the Wapiti arc is just an amazing conclusion. Our best selves. Arthur meets Dutch at camp, where Arthur learns that Pearson, Mary Beth, and Uncle have all left the gang. Dutch then tries to convince Arthur that they just need one final score and they'll finally be in their island paradise of Tahiti or maybe somewhere else. The gang then rides out to their final train robbery, with the whole gang plus new members Cleet and Joe riding out to get the money. It's basically exactly who went out in the last mission, plus Micah, Cleet, and Joe. Arthur and John then leave to get the dynamite, so they talk about how John and his family have to leave after the robbery is over because they can actually start a new life and they can do something else besides being stuck in this cycle of violence that the gang is in. They then join up back with the gang in Saint Denis, where Dutch tells the gang about the plan and how they're supposed to board the train in Saint Denis from the back, but the train eventually blows right past them in Saint Denis, making it a chase on their horses to eventually jump aboard. Arthur, Cleet, John, and Sadie all jump aboard the train, with Arthur and John quickly taking out some of the guards before shooting one who eventually sets a train car on fire, forcing them to jump back off the train onto Dutch and Bill's horses. After going on their horses and getting past the train car that's on fire, they jump back onto the train, and John uncouples the burning carriage while Arthur sets up a Gatling gun. As John is uncoupling the carriage, he actually gets shot off the carriage, and Dutch says, I'll go back and save him with like Micah and all these other horse riders. But they eventually leave and go their separate ways, and Arthur holds off the army men on horseback, allowing them to get to the armored car where all the payroll and everything that they're actually trying to steal from this train is, and then they blow their way into that. They take loads of payroll off the train before it goes off of the bridge that Arthur and John had already blown up earlier in the game. Dutch then returns where he says that John actually had died after the patrol got to him because they couldn't catch up, or he got captured by someone, but basically he's gone. This ends the mission, and it eventually transitions into Red Dead Redemption, which is the last mission of the game. This is a pretty good mission. I feel like it just sets up all the storylines that come crashing together in the next mission, but I do think it is a pretty fun chase to catch the train, and there are a lot of different things going on in this mission that are pretty solid, like chasing the train, going to the payroll, blowing up the things, and having the gunfight with like the Gatling gun. These are all pretty fun things. While they're not like amazing in their own rights, they all are solid, and it makes for a pretty fun train ride. And like the fact that it's also like the train is there to rebuild Bacchus Bridge and then it goes off Bacchus Bridge is kind of funny as well, but it doesn't really do much like push the plot forward. It's just kind of like the setup mission to allow Red Dead Redemption to conclude all these plot points together, besides like John being shot off the train. But it is just a pretty solid mission that does a good job of setting up everything for Red Dead Redemption, the final mission. Red Dead Redemption. The gang makes their way back to camp where Tilly tells the gang that Abigail got taken by the Pinkertons and Mr. Milton. Micah tries to convince Dutch that Abigail needs to be left behind because John is now gone, leaving Arthur and Sadie to have to save Abigail themselves. Arthur then gives Jack and Tilly some money and tells them to wait at Copperhead Landing for Sadie and Abigail. They then head to Van Horn, where the Pinkertons are, and Arthur complains about how Dutch has changed, where he's not the same guy that he was before, and that maybe he's just grown into the person that he's always been. They then come up with a plan where Sadie goes to find Abigail on the ground, and Arthur will cover her from the lighthouse just because he's pretty sick and he probably wouldn't be able to get around Van Horn as well as Sadie would. Sadie makes her way to Van Horn Trading Post, where she's eventually captured by Milton and his goons, and then Arthur basically just has to do the exact same thing as Sadie, fighting through Van Horn, which I don't know, I just feel like that's kind of like a redundant thing of like, oh, you're covering Sadie just to do the exact same thing yourself. Seemed kind of weird to me, but he eventually comes up to Van Horn Trading Post where he meets Milton and sees Abigail and Sadie tied up. Milton then reveals that Micah was actually the person that ratted on the gang, which started after the gang got back from Guarma, and they get into a grappling match before Abigail shoots Milton after escaping out of her bounds somehow. They then leave the town with Arthur riding on the back of Sadie's horse and protecting them from the Pinkertons shooting out all these people who are chasing after them. They make their way to a safe place where Arthur tells Abigail about John's supposed death, and they have their final goodbyes. Arthur then has his final ride back to the camp with "That's the way it is" playing in the background, and quotes from all of the characters in the game talking about Arthur and his like redemption story, in a sense, playing in the background. This is just a beautiful moment, and it does a great job of wrapping up Arthur's story by using all these people that you met throughout the game in the mission itself, which I just think is a really good idea. And it just shows that like all these different plot points and all these different things that helped Arthur's so-called redemption are all coming to the point right here at the very end of the game. Arthur then meets Micah and the rest of the gang at the camp and confronts them for a little chat. Arthur then reveals to the gang that Micah was actually the rat and he's been working with Milton since after Guarma. They then get into the Mexican standoff with Arthur on one side and Micah, Cleet, and Joe on one side. John then bursts back in, revealing that Dutch actually left him to die and he made his way all the way back from where he got shot. Grimshaw then joins Arthur's side, and then Javier bursts in saying that the Pinkertons are coming, which distracts Miss Grimshaw, and Micah gets the chance to shoot her. Dutch then joins the Mexican standoff, pointing his guns at both sides and then saying, "Who's with me?" Micah, Javier, Bill, and Micah's friends then go behind Dutch, joining his side, while John goes by Arthur and joins like the other side. The Pinkertons then come in and start a gunfight with the gang, and Dutch's side then escapes into the woods in the chaos of this gunfight, while Arthur and John are forced to make a retreat into the caves at Beaver Hollow, their camp. They escape through a passage in the back of the cave that leads up to the surface, and then they get back onto their horses. After riding away from the Pinkertons, both Arthur and John's horses are shot out from underneath them, and they're forced to fight their way out on foot. Arthur then has just this really amazing moment of calming his horse before its death, before he reunites with John to make the final choice. He can either go back for the money that Abigail told him about, or he can stay with John and make sure that he gets away safely. They then start climbing up a cliff where Arthur tells John to escape and head back to his family because he can hold off everyone else while John eventually does escape. Arthur then gives John his hat and tells him to go stay with his family because he doesn't have any time left and he doesn't need to be holding back John when John can escape safely and reunite with his family. Arthur then gets into a battle with the Pinkertons, fending them off before Micah eventually tackles him and they get into a fist fight. During the fist fight, Arthur does beat up Micah a little bit, but he eventually picks up a pistol and pistol whips Micah with it before they both end up on the ground with the pistol on the floor. Arthur then tries to crawl his way all the way to the pistol and eventually gets to it before Dutch shows up and steps on the pistol and Arthur's hand, ending the fight. The Pinkertons show up and Dutch and Micah each go their own ways, leaving Arthur to die there. Arthur dies right there, looking at the sunrise from the cliff and seeing his spirit animal while Unshaken plays in the background. The game then cuts to black and you start playing as John during the epilogue. This mission is just the perfect conclusion to Arthur's story, where he finally realizes that his premonitions about Micah were right the entire time, and he sees Dutch fully turned against him. He's also able to save the entire Marston family during this mission, with Abigail saving her in Van Horn, John saving him at the end of the mission, and Jack saving him when he's with Tilly, and he also gets to save Tilly in a way, so he can kind of die with no regrets with saving all these different people during just this mission. This mission also is pretty fun. I feel like the Pinkerton part is a lot more boring, but like the rides throughout the Roanoke Ridge area is pretty cool with all these just different gunfights happening. And I feel like there are just so many amazing emotional moments during this time. And there's also some pretty satisfying ones with Abigail finally shooting Milton and Arthur's confrontation of Micah at camp, which are also just great. The fist fight with Micah is also extremely satisfying as it shows how much stronger Arthur is than him, with Arthur being on death's door, able to still beat him up, which is just pretty funny. And like, honestly, that is probably one of my favorite fist fights in the entire game because you're really beating Micah while being at like 30% power. There's also just all these different emotional moments throughout this mission that make it the perfect conclusion to Arthur's story, with the ride back to camp feeling like a great full circle moment, the last moments with your horse, especially if you can really bond with your horse throughout the entire game and stick with one for a long time, and Arthur passing on his hat to John, all being these big moments that can make you cry now that Arthur's story finally comes to its end. And now here are my rankings for the missions of Chapter 6, which is the end of Arthur Morgan's story in Red Dead Redemption 2. The Wheel. We're then teleported to John's life in West Elizabeth, transporting Jack and Abigail on a wagon, talking about how they finally need to settle down and get away from the outlaw lifestyle. John and Abigail then go to Strawberry and split up when they get there, with each of them trying to find new jobs on their own. John then gets a job delivering goods to a ranch, while Abigail gets a job at the Strawberry's doctor's office. John finally makes it all the way to Pronghorn Ranch, where he meets the overseer before they start getting threatened by the local gang, the Laramie Boys. They take the wagon before John chases them down and returns their wagon to the overseer. John then gets a job at the ranch and gets his family into one of the houses at Pronghorn Ranch. This is an okay mission. While it does a good job of showing what John, Abigail, and Jack have been up to in the time in between their story and Arthur's, I feel like this mission is extremely boring and is kind of just like a fetch/delivery quest. It also doesn't really characterize any of the characters at all, which would have been nice because of the 8-year time skip. Simple pleasures. John meets Mr. Geddes in the barn and gets a job from Abe, one of the other workers at the ranch. Abigail and Jack are just arriving to the ranch, and Abigail gets mad at John for beating up the Laramie gang to bring the wagon back. John then starts milking a cow as one of his duties as a ranch hand. John and Jack then go to clean the manure out of the barn, and after they finish, John goes back to Abigail to talk about their plans for the future. This is just another pretty boring mission that doesn't do much to develop the story. It basically just does the actual job of a ranch hand. While it does make sense in the story of the game of like, oh, they want you to do all these boring missions to really understand what it's like to be John and be this ranch hand now, it's just not fun to do, especially as you just got done with Arthur's story. Fatherhood for beginners. John meets Geddes and Abe, where Geddes asks John to help his youngest son Duncan with riding his horse Jeremiah. He learns that Geddes goes into town to hang out with his affair partners, and that Jeremiah is a horse that's too big for Duncan, but he wants to control it to show how old he is. John then tires out the horse to make it a little bit easier for Duncan to ride him, before going to Mrs. Geddes to help her birth a foal. Mrs. Geddes then tries to seduce John after he gets the foal out of the womb, before he tells her he's married, and she backs off. John then returns to Abigail and Jack, where Abigail asks John to hang out with Jack for a bit and bond. John and Jack then go on a horse ride in the valley, which is genuinely one of the most beautiful moments in the entire game. The big valley area is just so amazing to look at, and this is absolutely amazing. And Jack hops on Duncan's previous pony, and John tries to teach Jack exactly how to ride a horse. After exploring the big valley area, John and Jack then race back to Pronghorn Manch, and I just think this mission is pretty solid. It's one of the best ones in this early part of the epilogue because of the beauty of Big Valley, and it does show off like kind of the geography of the area you're in really well. And the ride with Jack is pretty fun, even if the beginning of the mission is pretty boring, because I feel like going with Jack is just kind of a nice bonding moment, and it does well to set up that side of it. It's also just super calming with the beautiful soundtrack hitting in the background while John teaches Jack to ride. Farming for beginners. John meets with Mr. Dickens, who questions his background and what he was doing before working at the ranch. After putting in a bunch of different fence posts, Dickens summons him over to help with a bull that is out of control. John chases the bull around the farm, having a hard time bringing him in before eventually lassoing the bull and bringing him back into the barn. This is a really short mission, and while the bull chase is at least a little bit fun, there's really not much going on plot-wise, and it just is kind of like another boring menial task that John has to do as a ranch hand. Old habits. John confronts the Laramie boys on his property, where they come and threaten Geddes and his ranch, telling them that they should sell the place. John then gets into a fight with the leader of the gang, and John beats up the leader of the gang before Abigail comes and breaks up the fight and chews him out in front of the Laramie boys. They say that they'll come back, which leads right into the next mission. And this mission is extremely quick. I think it's like under 2 minutes. I do think it does a good job of setting up the division between Abigail and John, with John just trying to do his job in any way he can and using his skill set as an outlaw to the best of his abilities, while Abigail wants there to be basically no trouble so they don't have to move again, even if John does use his outlaw abilities to actually help the ranch. It also does a great job of setting up the Laramie boys as like the antagonists of this chapter, saying that they'll return to make the Geddes' lives a lot worse. Jim Milton rides again. Geddes asks John about the incident with the Laramie boys before John goes home to have dinner with Abigail and Jack and turn in for the night. During the night, the Laramie boys attack, and John runs out to protect the ranch. John goes to save Dickens from 2 Laramie boys beating him up, and Geddes says that 1 ranch hand died, and the Laramie boys stole his cattle. John then goes back to his house to retrieve his guns, before heading out to Hanging Dog Ranch, where the Laramie boys are settled. John confronts the Laramie boys out front, asking for the cattle back, before it turns into this all-out gunfight. They then clear out the Laramie boys from the yard, and John heads into the barn, where he gets into a fistfight with the Laramie boy that he just beat up at Pronghorn Ranch. After beating up and shooting the Laramie boy, John gets the hero's welcome when returning to Pronghorn, before Abigail glares at him and doesn't talk to him when he returns to their cabin. I like this mission a lot. It does a good job of showing how John really gets into the Geddes' good graces, while also showing the fraying and eventual destruction of his relationship with Abigail at this point in the game. It's also a pretty fun mission, as it's basically the same thing as like Sadie and Arthur's assault on Hanging Dog Ranch, except it's like better than that one because there's an actual like plot reason they're there at Hanging Dog Ranch, but does a good job of like, you know, shadowing that one and being like a reflection of that assault in the same way, and like having like similar fighting abilities with both of them. And you do get to take out the Laramie boys, which is pretty satisfying as well because they're just extremely annoying. Fatherhood for idiots. John returns to his cabin, where Abigail tells John they could maybe move to a ranch themselves before they get into an argument about how John always gets into trouble. Dickens asks John to go into Strawberry to pick up a parcel, and Abigail asks John to pick up something for her as well. John then asks Jack to tag along since he's been getting soft by reading all of his books. When they get to Strawberry, John drops his full name while picking up goods, and a gunslinger in the post office overhears and watches them with suspicion. On their way back to Pronghorn, the guy from the post office starts following them. More men start following them, and John turns off the road to confront the men while Jack hides. John quickly dispatches the men before heading back to Pronghorn Ranch. On the way back, Jack is particularly freaked out by the shooting, and Abigail reprimands John when they come back because Jack is just super freaked out and won't even talk to Abigail. This is a really good mission. It does a lot to advance the story to Beecher's Hope, but I feel like the gameplay is just boring. Yeah, I mean, it's just like a ride back to Pronghorn Ranch, and there is like a little bit of a shootout, but nothing really happens through this entire mission besides like the little shootout mission part. And I feel like that's not good, but like the overall plot of this mission is pretty solid, and I do like that part of it, but I just don't really like a lot of the epilogue missions like gameplay themselves. Motherhood. John heads to the Getty's house where he receives a telegram from Sadie Adler, who tells him about a job that he can work on with her and to meet her in Valentine. John then heads back to the house where he realizes that Jack and Abigail have left him. Dickens comes in and tells John to get back to work to get his mind off Abigail. After doing work around the ranch for multiple months, there's this big time skip forward. John goes to talk to Mr. Getty's about helping him put in a good word at the bank to get a loan to buy Beecher's Hope and get back Abigail. This mission does a good job of setting up the plot points for part 2 of the epilogue: bounty hunting with Sadie, finding a way to get Abigail and Jack back by buying Beecher's Hope, and finding a loan to pay for Beecher's Hope. While it isn't all that interesting of a mission, I do like the characterization of John in this mission and how he finally seems to buy into the fact that he can be a good man now and settle down. Gainful employment. John meets Sadie in Valentine where she stabs a man in the hand after an argument. Sadie asks John to tag along for her bounty where she says that she'll give him some of the money. Sadie says that her telegram was about her finding Micah and that they finally have the chance to end him for good. They then go to Strawberry looking for a banker who stole money, and they find him in Strawberry's welcome center. He escapes out the window and John and Sadie chase after him, starting to chase through the lands around Strawberry. They eventually catch up to him and hogtie him, ending the mission, but Sadie asks John to tag along on some more of her bounties. This is an okay mission. It's great to meet back up with Sadie after a couple of missions of farm work, but it is just kind of this boring bounty hunt, and essentially it's just chasing this dude on the horse and then hog-tying him, and the bounty's over. And I feel like they could have done a little bit more to make it just a little bit more interesting. Home of the Gentry. John goes to Blackwater to speak with the bank, but they ask him to clear squatters off of Beecher's Hope before he can buy the property. John can then give the squatters money or drive them off the property forcefully before heading back to Blackwater. After getting back to Blackwater, the bank approves the loan, and the bank guy says that the bank owns the property, but he can pay it off week by week. On the way out of the bank, John sees Uncle, and Uncle asks John to tag along with him. They get to the property where Uncle says that John's stuck with him and that he'll need Uncle's help to get turned into a real ranch. I do like Uncle finally joining the fold. I do think this is a pretty good introduction in getting him back into the game because he really wasn't used all that much in the main story of Red Dead Redemption 2, so it is kind of nice getting him back into the game, and I think his dynamic with John is just great throughout this entire game. And while this mission doesn't have all that much going on, it does a great job of like showing John switch into the rancher / what Abigail kind of wants out of him, and like finally taking the opportunity to be exactly what Abigail wants. Bare knuckle friendships. Uncle gets woken up by John and he says that Charles is in Saint Denis and that they should meet with him. They take the train over to Saint Denis where they split up to look for Charles. They learn that he's in a boxing match by the chapel at Saint Denis and meet up there. John then meets Charles, who tells John that he's been throwing his boxing matches to make some money and immediately places a huge bet on himself to win. Charles then quickly wins the fight, which enrages a lot of the fans but makes him a huge amount of money. John also asks Charles to join them at Beecher's Hope, and they head towards the docks where they talk about the old days and kind of what happened to each of the gang members, like what happened to Arthur and what happened to his dead body after the fact, and also like what happened to Strauss and all these different people. They then go down to the docks where they meet Angelo Bronte's successors, goons, who are mad that Charles won the fight, and they get into a gunfight, starting a police chase in the city. They then make it out of Saint Denis and meet up again with Uncle, leaving the city, starting a cutscene that takes them all the way back to Beecher's Hope. I like this mission a lot. Charles is one of my favorite characters, and it makes for some great dialogue now that he's back with John and Uncle. It's also just a great introduction for him back into the game. It does a good job of telling the story of Saint Denis 7 years after the game, with it being extremely similar, just controlled by a different guy The gameplay in this mission isn't all that great, with the shootout being boring, but I do like the whole plot and actually what happens, because Charles just getting brought back into the game is just super fun. Home improvement for beginners. The mission starts by Uncle roasting John for 1 minute, and Uncle roasts the house at Beecher's Hope, saying this is the worst house that he'd ever live in, and that Abigail would hate this house if she actually looked at it, which is super funny. Uncle then says the house needs to be destroyed because Abigail would never want to live in it with him. The house then just easily collapses, where they use these horses to tear the house down, and Uncle then suggests John should buy a house in town and get the lumber shipped to their ranch. This is just an okay mission. I mean, it's the shortest mission in the entire game. Not much happens, but I do at least like the cutscene with Uncle. An honest day labors. John meets Sadie at the Blackwater Saloon, where she tells him about a bounty that got stolen off of her and how together they could steal it back and cash it in. On the way to the target, they talk about Charles joining the Beecher's Hope crew and how Micah and Dutch ruined their gang. They make it to New Austin, where they scope out Langton's gang with the bounty coming out of Armadillo. They follow the bounty hunters to a canyon where the bounty hunters start to camp out for the night, and Sadie asks John which method they should use to pick off the bounty hunters. They start picking off the bounty hunters one by one, eventually starting a gunfight with all of them. After getting rid of most of the bounty hunters, they take the bounty target, Shane Finley, and fight off more bounty hunters blocking their exit out of the canyon. They then make their way back to Blackwater, where they turn in Shane Finley to the police there. And I do think this is a solid mission, being a cool bounty hunting mission, but I'm not really the biggest fan of the bounty hunting missions in the game, and especially as them being a real mission in the game. I wish there was just a way that they could have turned these into 4 or 5 different missions that you could do to make money back and not be these main missions that you have to go through. But it does at least have a pretty cool setting, with the gunfight being set in this cool canyon where you're shooting down at the bounty hunters below you, which I do like. I just don't think any of these bounty hunting missions really push the plot forward. They're all just oh, John has to make money somehow, and him and Sadie just catch up and talk a little bit. It's just not the most amazing mission. It doesn't do much to push the plot forward besides John can pay off his debt. The toolbox. John meets a guy in Blackwater who sells pre-cut lumber to build a house. After loading up their wagon with the pre-cut lumber, I think this is a couple days later, they head over to Manzanita Post to get tools to build the house, but keep 2 guns for hire to protect them from the Skinner brothers, a vicious gang in the area. They make their way to Manzanita Post, where they buy a toolbox from the Norwegian guy who lives there, who supposedly makes the best tools. They then make their way a bit past Manzanita Post and start getting shot at and ambushed by the Skinner brothers. Mr. Wayne, one of their guns for hire, is shot with an arrow, and a gunfight erupts. After fighting off the initial wave, Charles and John chase after Skinners, who take the tools and also snatch Mr. Wayne. They fight off some of the rest of the Skinners before finding the tools and that Mr. Wayne actually is dead and actually had a brutal death. They make it back to Beecher's Hope, where they unload the lumber. And this is just a pretty good mission. I love the fact that Mr. Wayne talks so much in this one mission before he dies. I mean, you just never expect it. It's another good mission that has a good plot twist. I feel throughout Red Dead Redemption 2, there's all these missions that start one way and end the other way. And I feel Rockstar really was great at doing these missions, because they do kind of catch you off guard sometimes. I mean, I feel these missions were all pretty boring for the most part in the epilogue without any cool plot twist. I feel this is the first plot twist that really happened. You can also see the Skinner brothers really have such a brutality streak, and it really just shows that they will be the antagonist of the whole second part of the epilogue. So I feel it does a good job of setting up the Skinner brothers as well. A New Jerusalem. John and Charles start building the house while Uncle helps them with the planning. I love the transitions from the cutscenes into gameplay moments, and the song in the background is one of the best parts of the entire mission. It also really feels like a cool way to do an in-game time lapse, giving a great sense of time and accomplishment when you eventually do finish it. And even though this is a pretty quick mission with finishing the house in just one singular mission, I do think it's just a really fun time. John then writes a letter to Abigail asking her to come back to him and that he's turned a new leaf since the last time they were together. This is just an amazing mission. While it is pretty short, it's a blast the entire time. It does a good job of wrapping up John and Abigail's frayed relationship by showing that John is finally ready to become the man that Abigail has always wanted. The soundtrack during this mission is amazing, and I really like the way they just weave the gameplay and cutscenes together, where it feels like you're just playing a cutscene itself, which is really cool, and it just makes it an unforgettable mission and one of the best ones in the entire game. A quick favor for an old friend. John meets Uncle and tells him to do something on the farm before they starve. Uncle then tells John to buy a barn to set up grazing because that's the only thing that will work on their land. After a funny confrontation with the guy at the lumberyard, John realizes he needs more money and meets up with Sadie, who says that she has another job, but it's too dangerous for just one person. They go to a random shack in West Elizabeth and they find their bounty target, Ramon Cortez, the leader of the Del Lobo gang from New Austin. They find Ramon and capture him at the shack before taking him all the way to Rhodes, where they need to go to cash in his bounty. They stay in Rhodes for a night, waiting for the police from Saint Denis to escort him to Saint Denis before the Del Lobo gang shows up asking for their friend back, which starts a gunfight in Rhodes. They then win the gunfight pretty easily, holding off the Del Lobos, but the Del Lobos during this time used the distraction to break Ramon out of jail using dynamite. So Ramon is now back on the loose. The sheriff in Rhodes then tells them they'll get $75 extra if they bring Ramon back, and that they won't be getting any money until they actually have Ramon back in jail. They then get to Dewberry Creek, where they find the Del Lobos are waiting for a boat to take them back to New Austin, with Sadie taking them head on while John covers her. They fight off Ramon's men before eventually capturing him after he tries to escape in a boat before more men show up. After fending off these men as well, they return Ramon to Rhodes, where he's loaded into a prison cart headed out to Saint Denis. John then returns to Beecher's Hope to see his barn built, and this is just overall a pretty fun mission with a lot of different stuff happening in this mission, from the gunfights in Dewberry Creek and Rhodes to Ramon getting blown out of the cell, but it doesn't really do that much to push the plot forward. And even though it is like kind of an interesting mission with a lot of different things happening, there's not really much plot going on during this time besides like the barn is built during this time. And I feel like the fact that you're not involved in the barn being built does kind of take away from like the fact that it is built during this mission and the enjoyment of the barn itself. So for this one, I'm not the biggest fan, but I do think it is a pretty cool mission nonetheless, and the best bounty mission in the entire game. Uncle's Bad Day. Beecher's Hope is finally finished, so Uncle, Charles, and John have a drink and a night to party. They eventually pass out at the end of the night before Charles wakes up John, saying that Uncle is gone. Charles realizes that the Skinners took him and are using Uncle as a trap to bait them. They dismount their horses before hearing Uncle scream and overhear a Skinner patrol that says that Uncle is still alive and just being tortured. They find a Skinner dragging a man behind their wagon and realize that they're close to the camp and eliminate the Skinner. They find the Skinner's camp and they realize that Uncle is actually being roasted on a fire before the Skinners ambush them while they weren't paying attention. They set Uncle free before more Skinners start attacking. They fight their way out, with John shooting while Charles carries Uncle back. After clearing out the Skinners, they make their way back to Beecher's Hope. This is another very good mission. I really like the shootout, the creepy atmosphere of the mission, and the soundtrack. There are all these things that like combine to make this regular shootout a more interesting shootout, and it's also just super nice to finally deal with the Skinners and like bring Uncle back, because he is really hurt by the Skinners, and even though he is just the biggest complainer of all time, this is one of the things that he's finally like right to complain about, because he normally just complains about the most boring things, but this time he actually got roasted on a fire by the Skinner brothers, so he deserves to complain every single time he complains about this. The Best of Women. This is a really short mission where Jack and Abigail finally arrive and come back to the ranch and reunite with John and Uncle and Charles, I guess. A Really Big Bastard. Abigail and Jack, after they return to Beecher's Hope, Sadie shows up to the ranch telling John that she has some business for him. Sadie also tells John that she knows where Micah is at, and Abigail gets extremely mad at John for being involved in all the violent work with Sadie. Abigail eventually does relent and lets John work with Sadie because she tells Abigail that it's not going to be a hard job and they're not doing anything violent for this job. They then find the guy's camp in a mess in tall trees where it looks like a bear rampaged through his camp. They find an abandoned cabin and a dead body before finding the bounty target in the cabin hiding from this so-called bear. The bear attacks them before John and Sadie fight it off and tie up their bounty to take him back. On the way back to Blackwater, 2 rival bounty hunters come to take the bounty off of Sadie, and John has to dispatch them. Sadie says that they're young and unexperienced people and that someone would have done it no matter what. They then talk about Sadie's whispers that she's heard about Micah, and then the mission ends. This is a pretty boring mission that just feels like a standard bounty hunting mission, just with a bear attack sprinkled in to make it a lot more interesting. I'm not really a fan of any of the bounty missions in the epilogue, but I feel like this one's clearly the worst because nothing really happens besides the bear attack. I feel like the bear attack is just a worse version of the bear attack with Hosea in chapter 2. It's just not a great mission, so I don't really like it. Trying again. John forces Jack out to do some father-son bonding while fishing, and Jack brings his dog Rufus along with them. After catching a couple of fish and bonding over old times, Jack goes to look for Rufus since he's gone missing. They find Rufus got bit by a snake, and John has to suck the poison from Rufus's leg, which actually has some insane lines coming out of Jack's mouth, like, "Spit it out and don't swallow it." Just some absolutely insane lines that come from like a 12-year-old boy. I also like the bonding between Jack and John during this mission, but not really that much else happens, which makes it a pretty boring mission to replay. A new future imagined. The Gettys boys come to the ranch at Beecher's Hope, where they give some extra furniture that they found to the Marstons. John and Abigail then head into town to get some extra things for their house and to spend some time together. They make it to Blackwater, where they go to get their portrait taken. After getting their portrait taken, they go to the theater to watch a movie, and then they go to the lake to row out during sunset. They go to the middle of the lake, where John asks Abigail to marry him in a real way, because technically they're like already married, but John wanted to do it in a real way and do it in front of God, and actually proposes to her, giving her the ring that he got from Arthur. There then is this really cool cutscene of John waking up on his ranch and watching the sunrise, showing that he's finally accepted the farmer/rancher lifestyle. This is just an amazing mission, and it really completes John and Abigail's story and shows that John can finally leave the outlaw lifestyle behind. While not much else happens gameplay-wise, I really love the story presented in this mission, and just so heartwarming to see Abigail and John finally try to get married. American Venom. This is the final mission in the entire game and the end of Red Dead Redemption 2's story. Sadie shows up to the ranch telling Charles and John that she actually found Micah, and while Abigail tries to stop John from getting his revenge, John is set on getting his revenge on Micah. They go to Strawberry, where Cleet, one of Micah's friends, had been spotted, talking on the way about their plans after getting rid of Micah. They find Cleet and Strawberry and string him up on the gallows before doing their interrogation, learning that Micah is up on Mount Hagen and that Cleet and Micah had fell out recently. If John doesn't hang him, Sadie will just shoot Cleet, but then they head out for Mount Hagen. When they get to Mount Hagen, Charles is shot by a sniper and immediately taken out of the fight. John and Sadie press up the hill while Charles follows behind because he has to move a lot slower because of the wound. They keep moving up the hill, fighting off Micah's gang, before John and Sadie are both tackled by Micah's gang members, with Sadie getting stabbed, before being saved by Charles, who shoots her attacker. John then continues on ahead alone, finding Joe, another one of Micah's goons that is in the end of Red Dead Redemption 2's main story with Arthur, and 2 more of Micah's goons blocking his way. John then quickly takes them out and moves his way up the mountain, fighting off more of Micah's goons. John then makes it to Micah's camp at the top of the mountain, where he has to clear out the rest of Micah's gang. He eventually then makes it to a tower on the mountain, where he finally finds Micah, and they get into a little shootout. Sadie then makes her way up the mountain, holding Micah up and holding him hostage, before Dutch bursts out, starting a Mexican standoff between the 3 of them, and giving Micah time to hold Sadie as his hostage instead, reversing it on her. John then tries to convince both Micah and Dutch to give up, before Dutch eventually shoots Micah in the standoff and walks away, not saying a word to John. John then goes inside the tower, where he finds the Blackwater money, giving them enough money to pay off their loans and have some to spare. They make their way back to Beecher's Hope, where they reunite with Abigail, Jack, and Uncle, and the closing credits finally play, showing John and Abigail getting married, Charles leaving them, Sadie leaving them, and the Pinkertons finally finding Beecher's Hope. we finally get our revenge on Micah and can finally have a satisfying ending to the game. While this mission does try to do too much in terms of wrapping up all these different plot points and making it so there's a nice transition from Red Dead Redemption 2 to Red Dead Redemption 1 by making Micah die, Dutch not working with Micah anymore, and Dutch doing kind of his own thing, Charles and Sadie leaving on good terms, giving the Blackwater money to John so he doesn't have any money problems going into Red Dead Redemption 1, and making the Pinkertons find them so the events of Red Dead Redemption 1 can kick off. This still is a super fun mission. I really love the soundtrack and does a great job of like giving the player a satisfying conclusion, even if all the plot threads aren't wrapped up in the perfect way, as they're kind of just like wrapped up in a way that makes sense, but if you like look at it, it isn't done in the best way. The soundtrack is amazing in this mission and really carries the mission, making all the no-name goons that John shoots on his way up to Micah feel way more impactful. And the deaths of Micah, Joe, and Cleet are all super satisfying, as they're the ones that ruined the Vanderlyn gang in the first place. Rockstar did a great job of creating the atmosphere for this mission, and it does a great job of fully ending the game and wrapping it all up, even if the plot threads aren't done the best. And here are my rankings for all of the epilogue missions. I wanted to combine them into one thing because I feel like the epilogue is kind of just like one chapter instead of the two that it's split into. And now here are my rankings for every single mission in Red Dead Redemption. I did exclude a couple of them because there isn't any gameplay aspects to them. I didn't really want to have any missions that didn't have any actual gameplay aspect to them. And this video took a super long time. So if you do disagree with anything, please let me know in the comments. But this one did take like over a month to make, so it was a really hard video and it's like 3 hours long. So this was just a great video to make, and if you did like the video, please like it as well. And here's some other videos that you need to watch after you did watch this video, because there are even more good Red Dead Redemption videos to watch.